Before we get into today's stories, visit dreadsarmy.com to sign up for the Dread Weekly newsletter so you don't miss out on any updates. Also, check out all of the channels in the Dread Network on dreadsarmy.com or in the description below. Thanks for listening. Now let's get to the stories. My name is Ethan, and I've been an avid listener of your show for a while. Your exploration of the unknown, the oddities and enigmas has always fascinated me. Today, I write to you with a discovery that is close to my heart and seemingly right up your alley. My grandfather, Jedediah, was a park ranger at Yosemite National Park during the 1930s. I've been diving into a trunk of his old belongings that's been sitting untouched in our attic since he passed away. It's a veritable treasure trove of letters, photographs, and notes, all weaving together a tapestry of his incredible life amidst nature's grandeur. Most fascinating among these artifacts is a letter he wrote to his sister Mildred in the year 1934. In it, he recounts an encounter with what can only be described as a Sasquatch. Reading his words, I can almost smell the pungent stench of the creature he describes, feel the raw, primal fear and awe that seem to have enveloped him. His detailed account of this encounter, complete with a description of a skull of monstrous proportions, has left me baffled and, I must admit, somewhat shaken. The real kicker is an old photograph I found, tucked between pages of a worn leather journal. It's a picture of my grandfather standing next to an enormous skull. The enormity of it is astonishing. There's a look in my grandfather's eyes in that picture, a blend of terror and fascination that aligns so powerfully with the words he penned in his letter. Having consumed every episode of your podcast, I couldn't help but draw parallels between my grandfather's account and the Sasquatch stories you've covered. I am aware that the lines between folklore and reality can be blurry, but I'm intrigued by the potential connection nonetheless. Attached to this email are scans of the letter and photograph. I thought they might pique your interest and potentially contribute to your ongoing exploration of such cryptids. I'm genuinely curious to hear your insights and perspectives on this extraordinary piece of family history. Thank you for your time and keep up the fantastic work. Your show has made me feel less alone in my curiosity and fascination with the hidden and inexplicable. Best regards, Ethan. Now here is his grandfather's letter to his sister Mildred, June 14, 1934. Dearest Mildred, I trust this letter finds you in good spirits. My time here in the spectacular landscape of Yosemite National Park has been filled with a blend of raw beauty and haunting wilderness that words can scarcely do justice to. However, Mildred, there are peculiarities to this wilderness, stories etched into the heartwood of ancient trees, whispers that curl around campfires, and beneath the luminous, watchful gaze of the stars, I too have a tale to share. I feel the need to document this experience as I am unable to shake its memory from my mind. The 6th of this month, a day like any other, was marked by an unexpected discovery. My day started under the radiant Californian sun, casting the splendor of Half Dome in sharp relief against the azure sky. Routine patrol took me through the winding paths around Mariposa Grove, where the giant sequoias stand as sentinels of the ages. In a clearing surrounded by these ancient titans, I was assailed by a wretched odor, an unholy melange of damp, rotting leaves and rancid meat. It hung heavily in the cool afternoon air, both familiar yet repulsive. The wilderness, for all its beauty, has its share of unsightly secrets. But the source of this particular secret was yet to reveal itself. In the heart of the clearing lay a monstrous skull, the likes of which I'd never seen. It was as if the ground had sprouted a monstrous parody of a man's head, broad and heavy, its form distorted and uncannily large, resting amidst a sea of rustling ferns. As I was absorbing this ghastly sight, there was a sudden crackling of underbrush, a shift in the shadows between the trees. And then, there it was, an abomination, a grotesque mingling of man and beast. It towered over me, a full 8 feet, covered in a patchwork of shaggy fur and leathery skin, its eyes glinting with an almost human intelligence. The creature seemed to embody the wilderness itself, wild, free, and indomitable. As terrified as I was, I couldn't help but marvel at this testament to nature's hidden wonders. Our exchange was fleeting. The creature retreated, melting back into the woodland as quickly as it had appeared. Yet the impact of that encounter lingers, a palpable ripple in the otherwise serene fabric of my park ranger life. In these pages, I entrust you with my experience, dear sister. I find it best to have a record, a testament to the profound and unexplainable occurrences that nature occasionally discloses to her lone wanderers. Enclosed is a photograph of myself beside the unearthed skull, a testament to the enormity of what I've witnessed. I look forward to the day when we can speak of these occurrences in person. Until then, I remain, as ever, your affectionate brother, Jedediah. I don't quite know how to say this, so I'm just going to come out and say it. I saw something the other day in the swamp that just confused the utter dickens out of me. There are 2 reasons that I like to go to the swamps. 1, because I like to row through it and enjoy nature as it is supposed to be. 2, because I am part of a neighborhood watch. I'm not sure what to call it, but I basically go out and look for animals that are in danger and try to keep some animals away from poachers if I can. On one of my trips out, I noticed something lying in the way, off the side of the river that looked like it may have been injured. It was laying on its side, partially on the bank and partially in the water. I thought it might have been killed by something or it was injured from something. I rowed off to the side of it and got out of my boat. I grabbed my snare pole out of the back and used the handle end to nudge the animal to see if it might have been resting, but it didn't move. Now that I was closer, it looked like it was a young crocodile, maybe only 5 months old. Well, the weird thing is, down here in America, we don't have crocodiles. We have alligators, so this looked very weird to me. I got my snare around where I thought its head would be, and I pulled it out of the water so it could breathe. When I saw that it wasn't an alligator or a crocodile, I don't know if I can describe it quite right, but it looked like a dog, like a crocodile dog. I know that sounds weird, but that's what it looked like. It had the ears of a dog, the eyes of a dog, and a snout that quite resembled more of a crocodilian-looking thing, except it had the trademark teeth of a crocodile. It was hideous looking. I also noticed that it had huge claws, and it had a mixture of fern scales. What the hell, I thought. Was this some sort of science experiment gone wrong? Its body was green, but again it looked and kind of resembled a dog, a very thick-skinned kind of animal. It was very hideous. Its mouth was hanging open too, like as if it was panting. I took the snare off it and climbed back into the boat. I grabbed a beef jerky stick out of my backpack and opened it. I stayed in the boat, but I threw it towards the thing to see if the smell of meat would wake it up. I saw its nose twitching from the smell. It moved its head sideways to eat it. Whatever it was still very weak and small and frail, but I didn't know why. I grabbed my water and got back out of the boat. I slowly poured the water near it so it could drink. Normally, I think I should be terrified by whatever this thing was, but it was injured and in a state that was almost near death. I checked its body for any kind of wound, and I saw that it had a gunshot on its side. It was then that this creature, whatever it was, began to act very aggressive towards me and almost coming back to life the closer I got to it. It started snapping at me and getting very lively all of a sudden. Maybe it was best that I stepped back into my boat, I thought. And so I did. And this thing started to become much more aggressive and hostile in nature, almost beginning to gain its strength back in a sort of a second wind or something. That's when it started to try and stand up on 2 legs, even though this thing was tiny, frail, and clearly hurt or injured. It didn't like that I was trying to help it, even though I didn't care that this thing looked like a failed science experiment. It was in my inner best heart that I wanted to see this thing brought back to health, no matter how hideous it was or unnatural it was. Again, I've never seen a creature like this before, but the second it started acting aggressive and trying to attack me with as little strength as it had, that's when I realized I should get out of there. And so I did. As I'm kind of pulling away, this thing seemed to regain its strength so fast and finally pursued me by jumping back in the water, swimming towards me. Listen, I know this sounds crazy and all, and normally I would tell you you're crazy if it did. This thing only seemed to pursue me for a little while after I got on my boat, and then disappeared underneath the water for good. I still think about it because this wasn't that long ago, and it was very weird. I've talked to some of my friends about it and other people who are in my animal neighborhood watch group, and nobody seems to know exactly what I'm talking about, or they think I'm making up the story. Anyway, believe me if you will, but this is my true sighting of something I would consider strange and unknown and possibly paranormal. The only thing I don't quite understand is why it was so frail and weak and floating under the water half on the shore like it was yanked out of somewhere and thrown on its side, left to die and then shot. Maybe it was stunned. Again, I don't really know. I'm just trying to get answers for all these questions that I have. Who really knows? Is it possible that this really was a science experiment and was pulled out here in the swamps and shot, left to die because it was a failed creation? That is something that haunts me still to this day. I didn't close my coffee shop because the business was failing. I didn't close it because my customers left or because the bakery section got a bad reputation. Nothing like that happened. I was successful, honestly. I was happy and successful, a combination that I thought was impossible for a very long time. You've got a shop like mine in town, I bet. The local coffee place the college kids go to. They all swear it's better than the big brand's coffee, even though the truth is, they just like the quiet atmosphere. Every town's got one, except for ours, I guess. You see, my shop stopped being about coffee. I couldn't think about cold brews or croissants any time that I walked through those doors. If I was within 3 blocks of that building, all I could think about was the thing I saw out back. The thing in the dumpster. The thing that started a man but quickly became something else. I closed up alone most nights. The shop would shut down for 4 hours before the baker came in to prep that morning's menu. I'd come back around dawn and business would start soon thereafter. This particular night, I'd gathered up the trash and was headed out back to the dumpster. It was my last task before locking up. When I saw the black lid was thrown back, I suspected the worst. Well, it had been the worst up until that point. The local homeless would sometimes rummage through our trash, searching for anything of value. I didn't blame them necessarily, but we didn't throw out much food and we didn't throw out recyclables, so their searching was more often a nuisance than it was rewarding. Regardless of whether or not I offered them a cup of coffee, they never took the eviction well. When I heard something rummaging inside of the industrial-sized green metal frame, I prepared myself for that conversation. "Hey!" I called out. "There's better stuff inside." Instead of responding, whoever was ducking inside the dumpster went quiet. They went still, as if I wouldn't eventually see them as I approached the structure. The closer I got, the more I realized how bad they were at hiding. I could still them breathing, heavy and labored. It sounded like something was obstructing their airway. Maybe they were sick. I didn't know. The low rumble of their breath did make me slow down, though. When I was finally close enough to see over the lip of the dumpster, I was more nervous than anything. I did my part to help the people in my community, but I wasn't eager to get sick myself. Right before I looked over the edge, the stranger reached out. A human-like hand, 4 fingers and 1 thumb, curled over the lip of the dumpster. The nails were long and dark, even in the poor nighttime light. Hair curled on the man's wrist and ran down to his knuckles. Although the fingers were bare, they looked swollen and inflamed. The coloration on his nails made me guess that they were infected somehow. I backed up. I stopped talking. Suddenly, the garbage in my hands wasn't terribly important. The next to rise over the edge of that dumpster wasn't the disease-ridden face I was expecting. I watched as the head of a dog climbed into sight. It didn't make sense, but that's what it was. A dog's head at the top of this thing's hairy shoulders. Its maw was long. Yellow teeth peeked out from between its curled lips. Its ears were tall like a wolf's or a fox's, and they were both pinned back against its head. I couldn't understand what it was. I still can't wrap my head around it. Not really. I just know in that moment, I was the smallest thing on the face of the planet, and I was standing in the path of a giant. It climbed one leg after another out of the dumpster and hopped to the ground. It tripped, fell onto its side with a nearly comical display of clumsiness. It was thin, starving, probably. That explained the look in its eyes, too. But I couldn't expect it to be weak or slow, even with starvation holding it back. It was taller than me by nearly 2 feet. I could imagine how long its stride was and how quickly it could move. It dropped onto all fours instead of standing upright. I couldn't outrun something like that, but I didn't want to stand there and face it either. I dropped the trash, splitting open one of the bags, and turned to flee back into the building. I heard the creature leap forward. I grit my teeth, expecting its fangs to sink into my back. That didn't happen. I reached the door safely, ducked inside, and locked it shut. Looking out the window, I could still see it. It was sniffing through the trash bag, chewing on a discarded paper cup. I was wrong, I realized. Starvation had saved me. Chewing its way through the trash was a lot easier than coming after me. I called both the police and animal control. Only animal control agreed to investigate the scene. By the time I could hear their tires rolling down the street, the monster was gone. Its ears had perked up long before mine. It glanced briefly at the window I was staring through, and then it disappeared. It ran off, disappearing somewhere in town. They told me it was a bear or a dog that I'd seen. I wasn't in any state to argue with them, but I know that wasn't some ordinary animal, and I couldn't get it out of my mind after that. So the coffee shop had to go. I don't tell this story often either. It isn't something I enjoy sharing. But please, if you hear something unseen rummaging through your trash, maybe investigate those sounds with more than garbage in your hands. This next one comes from a ranger located in Tennessee and has had several encounters with something they can't explain. In his email, he just asked to be referred to as John. Specifically, he worked at the Obed Wild Scenic River. To give a little more background into who he is and the area, it's pretty heavily wooded in north-central Tennessee, just north of the Cumberland Plateau. John described himself as a lifelong outdoorsman, having never really been afraid of anything in nature. So when this happened, it really shook him up. His sighting or experience dates back to July 1st, 2017, while working on the Obed River area. He was doing some sort of public event there where he decided to leave early. Now, as soon as he got into his truck and drove down one of the old fire roads, John claims that after about 10 minutes of driving on this road, something caught his attention in the rearview mirror. It was something he was not used to seeing because what he saw was a shine generally like that of the reflection of eyes, like from animals when you shine a bright light into them. But these were beyond his rearview lights. These were off in the distance, and they appeared to be like 2 orbs emitting enough light that they caught his attention. The lights were pulling him away and distracting him from driving. Looking in the rearview mirror, he could see something coming towards his vehicle from the back. Whatever it was appeared to be large and yellow and quickly approaching his vehicle. John wasn't really afraid in that moment, but just more curious. And so he slowly looks in his rearview mirror, trying to figure out what he's looking at. He then begins to come to a complete stop when he sees this thing coming out of the underbrush. And what he described was its movements, saying they were like that of a giant white spider. But also, he claims that what he saw was distinctly humanoid, that it had pale white flesh and appeared to be naked, but the way it was crawling down on the ground and moving around just reminded him of an arachnid. And as it made its way out of the underbrush towards his truck, it actually was able to erect itself fully up, and John saw more than he ever wanted to. He made note that it had a very abnormally large head and large hands. He says it was easily over 6 feet tall and had this very thin layer of hair covering its body. Not like fur, but more like body hair is how he described it. Very thin and very light. And in that very second, John informs me that his survival instincts kicked in on full blast. He immediately, without thinking, pulls out his firearm, gets out of the truck, and points it directly at this thing's face, which, by the way, he described as horribly disfigured and disgusting looking. And the thing immediately froze in its tracks. John got the impression immediately from its reaction that this thing somehow knew what a gun was, because it looked at him and looked down at his gun and then back up at him, and then slowly got back down on all fours into that weird crouched position that he saw when it came out of the underbrush, and it quickly scurried back the way it came. John claims that it never acted malicious but more so curious, and he almost wonders if it didn't even realize that he and his truck were there, and that it was merely just traveling through the area and happened to come upon him as he was driving through. Within seconds after this thing disappeared off into the dark, John describes this heavy, intense wave of nausea that overcame him and these horrific head rushes. John then just begins retching all over the ground. He had never had something like that happen before. From what he tells me, he doesn't take any medication, doesn't do chewing tobacco, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, or do drugs. So, for this to happen out of the blue, and to coincidentally happen right after this experience is very strange. Well, he wasn't completely terrified in the moment, but it did shake him up, and he was disturbed by the situation. He also made note to me that within the next 4 days, he would have these horrible bouts of migraines that would come and go. He said they were the most excruciating thing he has ever experienced in his life. It was like his head had been beaten by a brick, and the pain was so excruciating there'd be times he would just have to curl up in a ball. And then they would just suddenly go away as quickly as they would come on. And right around day 4, they had just completely ceased. John speculates that it was possibly radioactivity. Something he even further speculates is that the thing was potentially a mutant. One of his close friends who's been hunting near the same area since 2011 had told him too that he had seen some strange things lurking around this scenic area. In one event, late at night while deer hunting at Laurel Falls several years back, John's friend claims to have seen a creature that was very similar. All white, very lanky, actually almost to the T to what John described, and completely upright. John's friend said that he actually witnessed it taking down a full-grown deer, completely ignoring him when he was only a few yards away, watching the whole thing take place right in front of him. So, with all the strange things going on in today's world and all the bizarre phenomena and events going on in the woods, what do you guys think? Are there ways to explain away everything I've shared with you in today's episode? Or is this all just merely fabricated? Are these truly disturbing accounts, or are these truly the workings of something not of this world? Something going on in our national parks and to people just like me and you? I'll let you guys be the judge of that one. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to go ahead and slap that like button and leave a comment down below. As always, guys, keep an open mind. During my junior year of high school in Denver, Colorado, I had an encounter with what I think was a reptilian. It happened on October 12, 2003, while I was walking to catch the bus for school. While walking to the bus stop around 7 a.m., a very tall being appeared out of the woods. So I saw this figure, and at first I couldn't quite make out what it was. But then I realized it had visible scales and was walking upright, just like a man. Curious but also very creeped out, I ignored it for a moment and tried to pull out my phone, which at the time was a Nokia brick phone, only to discover the battery was dead. Putting my phone back in my pocket, I decided to see who this person was, assuming it was someone who thought they were funny walking around in a costume. I figured it was a little early for Halloween, but you never know. Sometimes you get those weirdos walking around. As I got closer, this thing I soon realized this was no joke. This thing looked like someone's nightmare. Its skin was scalier than I had first thought, and it had little horns on top of its head and back. Not like ram horns or anything, but these little spikes. I guess that's how I can describe them. But most impressive to me were the whites of its eyes. They were like tiny slit pupils. Now, I had never been afraid of much of anything before, but something told me in my gut that I needed to run. And now, I started running through the lot behind me, trying to get away from whatever this thing was. When suddenly, a car passed by slowly. This thing didn't even seem to notice me, but turned to get a better look at the passing car. When it did, I noticed that its face was more human than I thought. When I saw its face and looked more intently, I felt weird and began running faster to my house. By the time I reached my front door, I don't think it was following me anymore. Now I had heard of weird stuff happening in my neighborhood. Other kids who went to school with me would always joke about what they would call the green man. Supposedly, a tall green lizard man who stalked the marshes and woods. I always thought it was ridiculous. And I'm not saying that's what I saw, but I'm going to tell you what happened next. So, I started to tell my best friends about what I saw. Some of them believed me, some of them did not. But I think they could see how much it affected me. I mean, hell, I missed that whole day of school, and I wasn't going to dare tell my parents about what I witnessed. They would never believe me. The only choice I really had at the time was to share with a few of my close friends and primarily keep it to myself until all these years later when I developed an interest in cryptozoology and the paranormal. Thanks to sources like YouTube, which allows everybody and anybody to share their personal encounter stories and experiences, this is when I learned recently that I am not alone. In fact, I'm not crazy because I battled with that for years, convincing myself that it was just a strong hallucination or a bad nightmare, or a very vivid nightmare, I should say. Anyway, after hearing and learning everything that I have and spending copious amounts of hours researching and diving deep into my past, I believe that reptilians are real. Maybe not in the traditional sense of humans transforming into reptile creatures, but maybe reptilian cryptids are an actual thing. My name is Rob, and I'm writing to you from the outskirts of Whitefish, Montana. I've been living here for over a decade, enjoying the solitude of this mountainous wilderness. I spend most of my time outdoors, hunting, fishing, hiking, and observing the local fauna. A couple of days ago, I was up in the mountains looking for a fishing spot I'd been told about by a local guide. I had packed up my gear and was setting up for a quiet afternoon by a promising-looking creek. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the forest. As I was setting up my fishing line, I started to notice an odd sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, but then I noticed it had a rhythmic pattern to it. It was like a low flapping sound. Having spent so much time in the wilderness, I recognized that this sound didn't belong. Then, the temperature seemed to drop rapidly. It was an unusually cold evening for June, and there was this strange odor in the air, metallic, almost like the smell of blood. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine, something I haven't felt since my days in the military. Suddenly, about 20 feet from me, I saw something emerge from the shadows. It was about 5 to 6 feet tall with an uncannily human-like body. The most startling part, though, were these enormous wings. They were large and leathery, like those of a bat, and about the same size as its body. The creature was draped in black feathers that seemed to absorb the fading light, making it hard to make out any definitive features. But its eyes, they were large and reflective, a deep, unsettling red. It didn't seem to have a face, just these piercing red eyes. This encounter sent a wave of primal fear through me. It wasn't just the way it looked, it was the feeling it gave off, like I was in the presence of a predator. I was frozen in place, my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I stared back at those glowing eyes. As quickly as it appeared, the creature retracted its wings and receded back into the shadows. The sound of wings flapping echoed for a moment before disappearing completely. I found myself alone again, the only sound being my own quickened breath and the babbling creek nearby. I spent the next few minutes just standing there, trying to slow my breathing and gather my thoughts. I felt like I'd come face to face with a nightmare, a chilling encounter with something I couldn't explain. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to retrieve my scattered fishing gear. Every sound in the forest seemed magnified, my senses on high alert. It was as if I'd been plunged into a heightened state of awareness. I considered the idea of spending the night up there, as was my original plan, but the thought of encountering that creature again was too unsettling. The van was about a mile away, parked by the side of a dirt road. The journey back to the van was one of the longest I've ever made. Every rustle in the brush, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. But I made it back, locked the doors, and drove home without looking back. In the safety of my home, I started to reflect on the encounter. I couldn't shake off the image of the creature's red eyes and the ominous feeling of dread it evoked. I spent hours researching, looking for anything that could possibly explain what I saw, but found no satisfactory answers. I've decided to share my story with you in hopes that someone else might have had similar encounter or could shed some light on what this creature could be. I haven't been back to the creek since, and I've been having trouble sleeping, haunted by the memory of that night. In spite of the fear, I find myself driven by a strange curiosity. I feel like I've encountered a piece of the unknown, something that defies our understanding of the natural world. My name is Alex, and before the encounter, I was just an average guy, a little interested in the unknown, but nothing too much. Ever since then, it feels like I've shifted, you know? It's like my perspective on everything has changed. I was never one to dwell on the abstract or the supernatural. I was more a facts and figures kind of guy. If you couldn't explain it with numbers and charts, it didn't hold much weight for me. But this encounter, it really shook me. It's like a veil was lifted and I found myself questioning things I'd always taken for granted. Suddenly, the world felt bigger, scarier, but also more intriguing than it had ever been. It was as if I had been given a sneak peek into a dimension I never knew existed. I was at my uncle's place helping him some renovation work. He lives pretty much in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forest. Not exactly my cup of tea, but family is family. My uncle's property. It's a good chunk of land, mostly forested. It's quiet, peaceful to a point, but also kind of eerie. In a way, it feels like you're stepping back in time when you go out there, with the forest stretching in all directions, untouched by the modern world. Not to mention, the nearest neighbor is miles away. During the day, you could appreciate the solitude and the beauty of nature, but at night, the isolation could feel a bit unsettling. It's just you in the wilderness. And as I found out, maybe not just you. I didn't know much about local legends or anything. I'd heard stories from my uncle about weird stuff happening in the woods, but I thought he was just trying to scare me, you know? Typical stuff. I wasn't a believer, I suppose you could say. Then, one evening, while I was taking a break, I saw something. At first, I thought it was just a person, hunched over. But as I looked closer, I saw it wasn't. It was pale, almost sickly looking. Not ghost white or anything, just off. It was on all fours, but its body was oddly proportioned, like it was supposed to stand upright. It was disturbingly quick, too. It moved like nothing I'd ever seen. It was strange to say the least. It was as if it was struggling against its own form, the way it moved. Imagine watching a person trying to run on all fours, but with a speed that seemed unnatural. It was just not right. And the paleness of its skin was almost like a light in the dark, like moonlight reflected on a calm lake. It gave off an uncanny vibe. Something inside me screamed that this was very wrong. Definitely not something that belonged in the world as I knew it. I'm not gonna lie, Donovan, I was terrified. I froze. I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as it clicked, the noise echoing around the silent woods. Its face, those large black eyes, no nose, just this gaping mouth, like something out of a nightmare. But it didn't approach me, it just looked at me, then turned and sprinted off into the woods. When our eyes met, it felt like time stopped. I remember the chill running down my spine, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. It didn't advance towards me. Instead, it just sat there clicking. The sound was alien. It had this weird rhythm, almost hypnotic. Its face haunts me to this day. Those enormous black eyes felt like they were staring right into my soul. The lack of a nose and that open mouth, it was something straight out of a horror movie. But it was real as the cold beer in my hand. And then, as abruptly as it had appeared, it vanished into the dense forest, leaving me alone with my shock and fear. After it was gone, it took me a few minutes to collect myself. Once I got back inside, I didn't go back out, not until the sun was up. The next day, I packed my bags and left. Couldn't stay there knowing that thing was out there. From then on, I was more cautious, more aware, I suppose. And that's the real kicker, isn't it? How something like that can make you see things differently. After the creature had gone, I sat there in silence, my mind racing. I felt a sudden urge to pack my bags and leave, but I forced myself to stay put until dawn. It was a long night, filled with every creak and rustle magnified by my heightened senses. When I finally left the next day, the forest no longer seemed peaceful. It felt different, charged with a new sense of awareness. It was a harsh lesson about the mysteries that our world still holds, a reminder that there's so much we don't know. The experience made me more cautious, more observant, not just of the wilderness, but of life itself. It's funny how a single encounter can jolt you out of your usual path, make you question, and in a way, open your eyes to the possibilities. It changed me. It made me more curious, more open to the unexplained. I work at this summer home community in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. Best I can describe it is that it's like a nice neighborhood that's kind of like a resort with a swimming pool, golf, hiking, trails, spa, and clubhouse. It's the opposite of a snowbird community because it's completely inaccessible in the winter due to the snow in the mountains. I work there during the summer when all the residents are around, but I'm the only one who also stays through the winter, basically making sure the place isn't ransacked when no one else is there. I live in a small house and I don't do much except wander around in my pickup with the snowplow attachment, just making my presence known. I bring up supplies for the whole winter and just stay from October until early April or so alone. It's not as bad as it sounds since the satellite TV and internet work pretty well. I can communicate with the outside world. I just can't really get any goods I need during those months, so I have to plan in advance. I have a big chest freezer, but I also eat a lot of canned food. I do what I can, but the food does get a bit boring. My first winter up there was really quiet. Nothing much happened. I watched a lot of TV and ate a lot of chili and chips. This past winter, though, something odd happened. I usually try to walk around the neighborhood at least once a day, not just because of my job, but also just to get out. I would go nuts in the house all day. Unless it's a snowstorm, of course. One of the first days I was there, I went out. It hadn't snowed yet, since it was just October, but everyone was gone since you really never know when snow might come. They go ahead and close the community just in case. I still had a few winterizing things to do, like check on the pool's foundation. I headed down to the pool to do that, walking just for the exercise. I started looking around the pool when I heard this strange noise coming from the nearby woods. The community itself is all groomed and landscaped, but the woods really isn't that far away. It is the mountains after all. So a few yards behind the grassy area next to the pool was forest, basically. The noise was like nothing I'd ever heard, something between a yell and a yodel. Not really scary, but strange. I just watched the woods to see if I could get a look at whatever it was, but I didn't see anything, just heard that odd sound. A few weeks later, the first snow came. I stayed inside because I couldn't afford to get lost being on my own and everything. The next day, it was sunny, and I decided to first head out and plow the roads around the neighborhood. I'd learned by trial and error that if I let the plowing go too long, it'd be almost impossible to do it when it snowed again. Snow gets deep and packed in then, which wouldn't be a big deal since no one else was up there. But I couldn't really do my job if I couldn't go around checking on everything. I started up the truck in late morning and started driving around, plowing the few roads that snake around the 100 or so homes in the community. While I was plowing, I saw some tracks in the snow off the road. I'd seen tracks from coyotes, deer, and even bear, but these tracks were bigger. I couldn't see what they were though, and I didn't bother to get out of the truck to get a look. I didn't think much more about the tracks until one evening when I was walking on the newly plowed road. It was just beginning to get dark and I thought I should head back. As I turned around, I glanced toward the woods and saw something walking just outside the trees. At first I thought it was a person and I was scared. There wasn't supposed to be anyone out here. There wasn't any reason for anyone to be here, and if they were here, they had to have hiked or come in by helicopter. You can't use those mountain roads in winter, which is exactly why we closed the neighborhood. As I stared at it though, I could see it was too big and hairy to be a person. It was covered with hair or fur or something, but it wasn't an ape because it walked upright. Also, it was pretty far away, but I thought it was taller than a person, maybe 8 or 9 feet. I remembered the tracks then and wished I'd taken a picture of them. I was scared, but then I started to think that it must have been around for a while, and it hadn't hurt me, so why would it now? A few days later, I saw some tracks outside my house. This time, I did take a look at them and saw they looked like bare human feet. Only really big, like size 25 shoes maybe. I don't know. Right on my doorstep was dead fish. At first, I was scared. Did this thing come right up to my house and leave me a dead fish? But then I started to think maybe it was a gift, because it was fresh. And that creature must have gone to some trouble to get it since the lakes and streams were iced over. I took it inside and cooked it, and it was the best thing I'd eaten since fall. A few days later, it brought me a rabbit. That was a little gross, but what the heck? I found a video online on how to clean it and ate that too. It kept bringing me things all winter. Not every day, but every few days. And weirdly, I felt less alone. Once spring came, I didn't see any evidence of it anymore. It felt kind of lonely thinking it was gone, but I bet it'll be back this winter. I'm a forest ranger stationed in the Ozark Mountains, Arkansas. Been on the job for about a decade. It's been a regular enough life until one particular night last year. That's when things went odd. I was on a routine patrol following up on reports of strange animal noises and disturbances that had been troubling the local campers. We've got bears and bobcats, but this was different. Much odder. The first strange thing I noticed was an eerie silence that had settled in. No night critters making their usual noise. Felt like even the wind was holding its breath. Second, I found traces of unusual scat and prints, bigger than any native animals. Third, the forest trees. Those were damaged, broken, but not like normal storm damage. While the Ozarks are no stranger to storm damage, the trees I came across that night were different. They were not just knocked down, they were splintered, shredded. They looked as if something had torn through them, something big and powerful. More than that, the damage was high up, much higher than any bear could reach. It was as if a tornado had swept through, but only in a narrowly defined path. The sight was uncanny, and it chilled me more than the night air. That's when I saw it. The moon was full, providing enough light to see something massive ahead. It stood about 6 feet tall. Its body was shrouded in black feathers, obscuring most of it. As I approached, it unfurled wings large and bat-like, stretching wide across the forest floor. As the creature spread its wings, I could see how incredibly large they were, almost equal in size to its body. The moonlight filtered through the black, leathery material, casting an eerie glow on the forest floor. They seemed less like wings you'd find on a bird, and more like those you'd associate with bats, with visible veins and joints. I could hear a slight rustling of leaves and twigs under the creature's size and weight. The wings' sheer size and the sight of them opening up, filling the quiet forest with their presence, was an image that's been seared into my memory. Its face, or rather, the lack thereof, was the part that really threw me off. No discernible facial features, just two large, reflective, red eyes that glowed ominously. I froze, heart hammering against my ribcage as those eyes locked onto mine. In that stillness, it was incredible how the eyes held my attention. They were too large to match any animal I knew, with a depth and intensity that was almost hypnotic. The red glow they emitted wasn't like the reflection of light you'd see in an animal caught in a headlight. Instead, they glowed with an internal luminescence reflecting off nothing, staring back at me with an awareness that was terrifying. It was as if they were seeing right through me. I could almost feel their gaze on my skin, raising goosebumps and causing a cold shiver to run down my spine. In the immediate aftermath, I scrambled backwards. Once I broke away from its gaze and stumbled back, I managed to pull my radio from my belt and call for backup. The signal was staticky and weak, just like my own shaken voice as I tried to describe what I'd seen. The eyes, the wings, the splintered trees, how do you put that into words? By the time my fellow rangers arrived with their headlights illuminating the scene, all that remained were the massive prints. The impressions were deep and large, much like the owner who'd left them behind. And though the creature had vanished, a faint, otherworldly screech still echoed around us, a chilling reminder of the encounter. Ever since then, I've been plagued with nightmares, of those glowing red eyes, of massive wings stirring up the forest floor. The encounter affected me more than I'd like to admit. The nights that followed were restless, haunted by dreams of large glowing red eyes watching me from the dark corners of my room. Each sound in the night would set my heart racing, recalling the echo of massive wings and those eyes. I'd wake up in cold sweats, the image of the creature etched into my mind. I filed for a transfer soon after, wanting to get away from the forest and the memories it held. However, the slow grind of bureaucracy has left me stuck here, my request for transfer lost in a sea of paperwork. Meanwhile, every night spent here feels like a countdown, a dreaded anticipation of another encounter. Do what you will with this information, but please know that it is all true. Ever since I was young, I always wanted to be in the medical field. I was a certified nursing assistant, CNA, for a couple of years before I eventually entered medical school. I worked in a nursing home in a small town in Michigan. When you work in a nursing home, you essentially grow the size of your family. You become so close with them. You meet their family, learn about their lives, look forward to their stories, laugh with them, cry with them. And even though it's hard work, it's very rewarding. I can't tell you how many patients have told me that I was like a child to them. These patients will always have a special place in my heart. There was this lovely old woman named Mrs. Clark who was always full of life. She always wore this old red hat, and her teeth were terrible. Despite these quirks, she was by far one of my favorite patients. About 2 weeks before she died, she would talk about these 3 little girls that were following her around. Every time I would check on her, she would have new stories about what these 3 little girls recently did. As she told it, they'd say crazy things to her, make her laugh, show her their toys, and she always had a new story about these girls. I never saw any of these girls, obviously. I figured it was just her dementia playing tricks on her mind at the time. Then Mrs. Clark passed, and it was one of the hardest deaths I've had to deal with as a CNA. Then a new patient, Mrs. McCon, and I ended up moving into her room. She was a very calm and cheerful old woman. She always had a smile on her face and never caused any problems. She was gentle as a lamb, and being in her presence was very soothing. She reminded me of my own grandmother, and I would always spend extra time with her. Then, all of a sudden, Mrs. McConaughey started talking to me about 3 little girls that would visit her. They would tell her about their days. They would bring her toys, tell her jokes, and dance around her bed. Every time I visited her room, she had a new story about these 3 little girls. It was too coincidental, and I started to really listen intently to Mrs. McConaughey when she would talk about these 3 little girls. I knew for a fact that there weren't any actual young girls that were visiting her. Initially, I thought there had to be someone's daughters that would visit the nursing home, but only Mrs. McConaughey was seeing them. Then Mrs. McConaughey passed away. Shortly after that, we had the next patient move into a room named Mr. Mason. Mr. Mason was awesome. He was really kind-hearted and jovial. He was always a gentleman, and he would tell the best stories from his past. Most people his age like to tell the same stories over and over again, but Mr. Mason always had a new amazing story to tell. He was really funny and could always get the whole room laughing. He was very active in the nursing home activities, and everyone just loved him. A couple of weeks before he died, Mr. Mason started mentioning the 3 little girls. He would talk about how he loved how playful they were and how happy they always were. This really freaked me out. He was the 3rd patient in a row to talk about these girls. Nobody else in the nursing home was telling stories about these 3 girls. It was just the patients in that particular room. It was very unsettling. Then, one night, my coworker Sarah and I were both assisting Mr. Mason in getting ready for bed. All of a sudden, he asks me, "Who's that standing next to you?" I replied, "Don't be silly, Mr. Mason. You know Sarah, you see her all the time." He shook his head and said, "No, the other one standing next to her." Sarah and I both looked at each other, and I could feel the adrenaline shoot through my limbs. This was getting to be too much. In fact, it was becoming absolutely terrifying. Mr. Mason passed away later that evening, and I relocated shortly after that, but couldn't get these 3 girls out of my mind. Years later, I made a shocking discovery. I was visiting friends down the street from that nursing home and learned that there had been a terrible fire at the location years before the nursing home was built. There was a barn that caught fire and 3 little girls were burned alive. I'm sure my eyes went wide when I learned those facts, but I kept my thoughts to myself, knowing that my story would never sound possible. When you work with the sick and the elderly, you develop a unique relationship with death and energy. Strange things often happen to people when their time comes, and I feel like pretty much every nurse has some crazy story to tell. But I think about those 3 little girls a lot. I wish that before I moved away from Michigan, I could have done something to help those girls move on into the next life. Before I die, I would like to return to that room and at least tell them that it's okay to move on. I'm no supernatural expert, but I know that something is keeping them from moving on into the afterworld. The face Mr. Mason made when he asked who was beside Sarah was really disturbing. I'm thinking that whatever or whoever he saw is what is keeping them there. I hope I can figure it out. I'm not the type to believe in monsters or any of that nonsense. At least I wasn't until a couple years back when things took a really weird turn. I'm a surveyor by trade. I was out in the thick of the Colorado wilderness, marking boundaries for a client looking to build. Beautiful country, but damn lonely, miles from any kind of civilization. I remember it being a day like any other, clear skies and a slight chill in the air. That day, I was mapping out the south section of the client's property. I always enjoyed working that area. It offered great views, a lively creek, and the sound of birds trilling in the distance. The landscape was a mix of rolling meadows and dense pine forests, untouched and pristine. The seclusion didn't bother me. It gave me peace, a chance to get away from the usual city noise. It felt like my own slice of paradise, which was probably why I was caught so off guard when the day took a drastic turn. Honestly, I wasn't looking for anything out of the ordinary that day. Just doing my job with my head stuck in data and measurements. But as dusk fell, that's when it started. I remember a smell like rotting meat, stomach turning, even for a guy who'd worked around roadkill before. It wasn't until I was deep in the forest, a good 2 miles from my truck, that the smell really hit me. It was putrid, as if the entire ecosystem was rotting away. My first thought was maybe a bear had taken down something big, like an elk, and I just stumbled into the aftermath. But this was something else, something I couldn't quite place. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, a warning sign of some sort. The normal hum of the forest seemed to quiet down, as if the birds and bugs were reacting to the same gut-wrenching odor. It was at that point I realized this wasn't just another day at work. Something was off, very off. Then, in the failing light, I saw something. Big, 9 feet tall, easy. I thought it was a dead tree at first, a really gnarly one. But trees don't change their location. And this thing did. It had the legs of an elk, long and sturdy, but something was horribly wrong. The skin was hanging off like it was rotting away. As my eyes adjusted to the encroaching darkness, I tried to make sense of the figure in the distance. At first, it seemed to blend with the trees so tall and skeletal. The antlers made it seem like a bizarre, grotesque statue, an artifact of nature worn by time and weather. I saw the flesh hanging loosely from its frame, revealing a skeletal structure beneath. It was as if the animal had been dead for months and was just an upright carcass. That's when a chilling gust of wind brought another wave of that terrible smell, and the creature shifted on its elk-like legs. I watched as this nightmarish figure detached from the tree line and moved towards me, becoming horribly real. The head is what really got me. Like a deer skull, antlers and all, but with 2 empty holes where the eyes should have been. Except they weren't empty, Donovan. They were glowing, flickering between this unnatural yellow and an angry, burning red. I remember the feeling of my heart thumping against my ribs as I watched this thing, this impossible creature, turn its head towards me. The skull-like face was a horrifying sight. The antlers added a certain sinister elegance, but those empty eye sockets, they were something straight out of a horror movie. Suddenly, they lit up. First, a piercing yellow, illuminating the surrounding woods with a sickly glow. Then they switched to a malevolent red, casting an unsettling hue onto the decaying flesh that hung off its body. The sight of those shifting lights where I should have been, that's what kick-started my adrenaline and jolted me out of my stupor. What could I do? I was in shock and couldn't move. Then, when the shock wore off, I ran. I didn't stop till I hit my truck, locked the doors, turned the key, and got the hell out of there. Never been so scared in my life. My work for that client? Unfinished. And I never went back for it. Since then, I've been a changed man. I now keep a close watch on my surroundings. So make this a note to you too. Be aware, because if there's something like that out there, who knows what else might be hiding in the shadows. Ever since that night, I've found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, both in the wilderness and in the city. I try to convince myself it was just a hallucination, a trick of the light, but the memory is too vivid, too real. I've started studying local wildlife, trying to match what I saw to some known creature, but nothing fits. I've taken up self-defense classes, even bought myself a sturdy hunting knife, just in case. I can't escape the feeling that I've seen something unnatural, something unexplained. It's taught me that the world is a lot bigger and stranger than we think, and that there are still mysteries out there waiting to be discovered, even if they're the kind you'd rather never encounter. Hey, Donovan. For the past decade, I've been a Boy Scout leader in the hills of West Virginia. I've always loved the outdoors, the peace of the woods, the camaraderie of the troop. But there's one hike that sticks out in my memory, and not for the reasons you'd think. It was a late summer evening and we were on a weekend camping trip. We'd set up camp near a creek and I decided to take a few of the older boys on an evening hike. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the trees, and the air was filled with the sounds of the forest settling in for the night. We were about a mile from camp, following a narrow trail that wound its way up a steep ridge. I was leading the way with the boys strung out behind me when I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. There was a movement, a sort of unnatural twitching in the underbrush off to the side of the trail. I held up my hand to stop the boys and turned to look. At first, I thought it was a fallen tree branch, bleached white by the sun. But then it moved. It unfurled, pulling itself up from the forest floor in a way that made my skin crawl. This thing, it was long and thin, like a stick figure drawn by a child. It was pale, almost white, with skin stretched tight over its skeletal frame. It had these long, spindly arms that reached down to the ground, ending in sharp, claw-like fingers. Its legs were bent backward like a grasshopper's, and it moved in this jerky, twitching way that was just wrong. Its head was small and round with two large black eyes that reflected the dying light. It didn't have a mouth that I could see, just those eyes staring right at us. I stood there frozen as this creature watched us. The boys behind me were silent, and I could feel their fear like a living thing. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the creature dropped back down to all fours and scuttled off into the underbrush, disappearing as suddenly as it had come. We made our way back to camp in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. I didn't know what to say to the boys, how to explain what we'd seen. We never spoke of it, not even amongst ourselves. But I know it's a memory that we all carry, a reminder of the unknown that exists just beyond the light of our campfires. I don't know what that creature was, and part of me is glad we never encountered it again. But I can't help but wonder, every time I step into the woods, what else might be out there, hidden amongst the trees. My name's Aaron. I used to be an electrician in San Francisco until I retired early, due to a stroke of luck in the stock market. That was in 2015, with plenty of free time on my hands and very few financial worries. I began to explore the natural beauty of California, a thing I had always wished to do but never had the time for. I began hiking in earnest, all over the state but Yosemite National Park, with its majestic cliffs, waterfalls, and lush forests, always held a special place in my heart. In April 2017, I decided to take on the grueling Yosemite Falls Trail, an 8-mile trek with an altitude change of nearly 3,000 feet. It was challenging, but I prepared for it. Packed supplies, a map, sturdy boots, and a sense of adventure. After reaching the top of the trail, I decided to stay overnight at the designated campsite near Yosemite Point. As an experienced hiker, I knew that nighttime in the wilderness could be treacherous, but I also appreciated the serenity it offered. That night, I was alone, knowing that at this point of the day, the next set of hikers wouldn't show up until the following day. I spent the evening by a small fire, eating my ration meal and enjoying the tranquility. As I was getting ready to turn in for the night, a rustling in the underbrush nearby caught my attention. At first, the sound was faint, and so I thought it was just a small mammal of some sort. But then it emerged. It was about the size of a bear, maybe slightly larger, but it didn't move like any bear I had ever seen. Its legs were unusually long and thin for its size, ending in what appeared to be cloven hooves. Its body was covered in a dark fur that was knotted and filled with dirt. But what stood out most were its eyes. They were a striking amber, glowing in the dark, filled with an intelligence and curiosity that confused me beyond belief. I was rooted to the spot, my heart pounding. It stood on the edge of the clearing, just observing me. It didn't seem hostile, but its sheer size, unfamiliar appearance were intimidating. I held my breath, not daring to move, as it started to circle my campsite, its gaze never leaving me. After some unknown period of time, it slowly backed away into the forest, disappearing as silently as it had arrived. I let out the breath I had been holding and quickly extinguished my fire, retreating into my tent. After that encounter, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. I had always been a rational man, someone who believed in science and facts, but what I had seen did not fit into any existing categories. It was an unknown, something I wasn't prepared to handle. At dawn, I packed up and practically ran down the trail, driven by a primal urge to put as much distance between me and the creature as possible. Once I got back to my car, the realization of what happened fully sank in. I was shaken, my entire body trembling, a cold sweat breaking out. I went home and did extensive research trying to find any animal that fit what I had seen. I checked local legends, reports of unknown creatures, everything, but found nothing that matched. For weeks, I couldn't go back to the woods. The place that had given me peace was now tainted by fear and uncertainty. However, as time went on, I realized that, as terrifying as the encounter was, the creature had not harmed me. It had observed me, yes, but it had not shown aggression. In some strange way, I felt like it was just as curious about me as I was about it. This realization led me to a sort of acceptance. I started hiking again, but I was more cautious, more respectful of the wilderness and its unknowns. I haven't seen the creature again, but I'm okay with that. It has made me aware that there are still things out there we don't understand, and maybe that's how it should be. I still go to Yosemite. I still love the wilderness, but I respect it more now, aware that I am merely a visitor in a world full of secrets. The fear has lessened, but the awe remains, a constant reminder of the night I came face to face with the unknown. My name is James, and I'm an ordinary guy who enjoys taking long drives to clear my mind. On October 12, 2017, I embarked on a solo road trip from Nashville to Indianapolis along Interstate 65. The trip was a little less than 300 miles. Little did I know that this particular journey would become an experience I'd never forget. The night was exceptionally dark, with a new moon hiding behind thick clouds. The hum of the engine and the music playing on the radio kept me company as I traveled through the remote stretches of Kentucky. It was around 2 a.m., and at this time of night the road seemed eerily deserted. As I approached an area enveloped by dense woods, an overwhelming feeling of isolation washed over me. The lack of streetlights only amplified the inky blackness around me. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, I focused on the road ahead, keeping my eyes fixed on the yellow lines guiding my way. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement to the right. My heart skipped a beat as I turned my gaze in that direction. There, just beyond the tree line, stood a creature unlike anything I had ever seen before. Its appearance was both intriguing and unsettling. The creature stood approximately 6 feet tall, with a lean, muscular body covered in short, charcoal black fur. Its limbs were thick, giving it an almost bodybuilder-like appearance. The head was large and shaped like a cross between a canine and a feline, with piercing, glowing eyes that seemed to emit a faint, otherworldly light. Its ears were pointed and twitched in response to every sound, giving it a freaky level of awareness. The creature moved with a predatory grace, its movements fluid and deliberate. Its forelimbs ended in sharp, elongated claws. The creature's tail was long and thin, swaying from side to side as it scanned the area, seemingly searching for something. My breath caught in my throat as our eyes locked for a brief moment. The creature's gaze held an intensity that sent shivers down my spine, as if it was peering into the depths of my soul. I could sense an intelligence behind those eyes, a primal curiosity mixed with a hint of something almost human. Fear and fascination battled within me, leaving me paralyzed for what felt like an eternity. Finally, as another car approached from behind, the creature turned and darted back into the dense undergrowth, disappearing from sight. After the encounter, a sense of bewilderment and unease settled over me. Questions raced through my mind. What was that creature? Where did it come from? Was it a figment of my imagination, or did I truly stumble upon something unknown to science? Unable to find any logical explanations, I continued my journey in a daze. The encounter had shaken me to my core, leaving a lingering feeling of vulnerability and curiosity. I found myself questioning the boundaries of our world, realizing that there are still mysteries lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. From that night forward, I developed a deep fascination for the unknown. I immersed myself in research, scouring books and internet forums, searching for any clue that could shed light on my encounter. I joined online communities of fellow enthusiasts, hoping to connect with others who might have experienced something similar. Though I never encountered the creature again, the memory of that night remains etched in my mind. It serves as a constant reminder that there are still unexplored realms within our world, waiting for those willing to embrace the enigma and venture into the unknown. Jerry's the name, and trucking's my game. I've been punching the clock behind the wheel for nearly 20 years. I've come across everything from deer to bobcats on those long stretches of highway, but it was a warm night back on August 11th, 2019, near Winnemucca, Nevada, that I had a run and that still has me checking my mirrors more often than I'd like to admit. I was in the saddle, eastbound, and down with a load of appliances out of Sacramento. It was past the witching hour. The moon was riding high and I was about to scout for a flat and level to catch a few winks when something off the beaten path caught my eye. Nevada's nothing but tumbleweeds and Joshua trees as far as the eye can see, so you'd be forgiven for thinking I'd lost a few of my marbles when I tell you there was a figure out there standing as tall as a roadside billboard. Its body was bulky, like a bulldozer, only covered in this strange leathery hide that had a weird grayish tint. It moved with an uncanny fluidity, like a dancer in slow motion, and despite its bulk, it didn't seem to be bothered by its size. The thing's arms were crazy long and seemed to sway back and forth as it moved. The hands at the ends were almost brushing the scrubland beneath. I rubbed my eyes thinking maybe I was road weary, seeing things. But when I looked back, it was still there, and closer now. It was then that it turned and I saw its face. The head was oddly small compared to the torso, perched on a thick neck. But what got me were its eyes, two glowing orbs, shiny as polished chrome, glaring back at me like high beams. I was about ready to stomp the pedal, get the hell out of Dodge, when it let out a sound. It wasn't a roar exactly, more like a low, resonating growl that shook my Freightliner like it was made of tinfoil. Nearly knocked me clear out of my seat. Then, quicker than you could say, what the hell was that? It was gone. It loped off into the desert with an agility that did not match its size, leaving me gripping the wheel like a vice. After that night, I was pretty tight-lipped about the whole ordeal. Truckers might be known for telling tall tales, but this was one yarn I wasn't keen on spinning. You don't want to be known as the driver who's a few gears short of a full box after all. But that encounter, it messed with my wiring. These days, I go out of my way to avoid Nevada at that time of night. I'll take the long way around, pay the extra for diesel, just to avoid that stretch of highway. And on the nights when I can't dodge it, I drive with one eye on the road, the other in the rear view. There's always a chill running down my back as I pass that spot, like someone walking over my grave. To this day, I'm still in the dark about what it was. I've Googled everything I can think of and looked up every animal that walks this earth, and I still can't find anything that matches up. All I know is it's out there, somewhere in that godforsaken desert, and it's a memory etched into my brain as clear as the Nevada sky. I'm writing this to you so you can be forewarned if you're ever driving that stretch. I would suggest you do as I do and keep one eye forward and one eye back. I'm just an average, everyday guy. I enjoy football, a cold beer, and spending time with my friends. I used to dismiss crazy conspiracies, aliens, and all that nonsense. But now I'm not so sure. Something happened to me that changed my perspective forever. I find myself relating more to those people who I once considered eccentric. When you witness something truly inexplicable, it forces you to question everything you thought you knew. It all took place years ago in West Virginia. Deep in the rural areas, trees grow thick and the rivers run deep. My two buddies and I embarked on our usual fishing trip. It had become an annual tradition since our college days. We were just regular guys with different jobs. I worked at a restaurant, my friend Mike was in the tech industry earning a good income, and Rob taught high school. That day started like any other. We fished, enjoyed a few beers, cracked jokes, and relaxed. As the day drew to a close, we gathered around the campfire, chatting away. Then, out of nowhere, something incredibly strange occurred. A colossal shadow passed over us, blotting out the stars. I'm talking massive, resembling the size of a small plane. What made it even more unsettling were its glowing, eerie eyes. It resembled a large bat with a demonic appearance. Needless to say, we were all terrified. Yet still, we decided to follow it, grabbing our flashlights and guns as we ventured into the forest in the direction it flew. We discovered some significant footprints on the ground and broken branches high up in the trees, but nothing more. Although we didn't encounter the creature again that night, we kept hearing the most chilling noises. High-pitched screeches and flapping sounds that gave us the creeps. Needless to say, we didn't get much sleep. To be honest, we were genuinely frightened. This wasn't just some ordinary wild animal we were dealing with. It was something else, something beyond explanation. The next morning, we came across a local hunter named Hank. When we recounted our experience, he appeared spooked but didn't say much. It was as if he didn't want to accept our account, yet he knew better. We swiftly departed shortly after that encounter. Unfortunately, Rob stumbled over a branch and foolishly broke his ankle, forcing us to cut our trip short and take him to the hospital. Once we returned to civilization, we delved deeper into the incident. Mike stumbled upon stories about sightings of a massive flying creature in West Virginia known as the Mothman. Suddenly, everything began to fall into place. Initially, it sounded far-fetched, but it was the only plausible explanation for what we witnessed. The Mothman was said to possess glowing eyes similar to the ones we saw, and the location we were in was notorious for Mothman sightings. As it turns out, the Mothman is a legendary creature cited by many individuals throughout West Virginia. Its true nature remains a mystery, but it has become part of the local folklore. While we may never discover the complete truth, I'm telling you, what we saw was the actual Mothman. It may sound incredible, but it fits the circumstances, my friend. We decided to change our fishing destination from then on. We wanted to avoid any future encounters with the Mothman, if you catch my drift. Despite our encounter, we were profoundly shaken. It became the primary topic of conversation whenever we gathered. We even attempted to reach out to experts, individuals who research such phenomena, but none of them could provide a definitive answer. Everyone had their own theories about the Mothman, but nobody could offer concrete evidence. Thus, we were left to draw our own conclusions. We still continue our annual fishing trips, but we deliberately steer clear of West Virginia. We aren't seeking another visit from the Mothman, if you understand what I mean. We opted for a more popular, well-known location, where the biggest threat is a sunburn. However, every time we gather around the campfire, the story of that night inevitably resurfaces. Our friends and family struggle to comprehend our tale. Some think we're playing a prank, while others simply shake their heads, attributing it to an excessive consumption of horror movies. Furthermore, everyone loves to mention the fact that we were drinking beer that night. But truth be told, we all enjoy a good drink. Even if we were slightly intoxicated, we all witnessed the same phenomenon. What are the odds of that happening? Seriously? This experience, my friend, shook me to my core. It completely transformed my perception of the world. Previously, I believed the world was straightforward, that everything could be explained, but now I realize that mysteries exist, things that science cannot currently fathom or may never explain. Regarding the media, I used to trust their reports without question. However, I now find myself wondering what else they might be concealing or intentionally keeping from us. Could there be more stories like mine? Dismissed and swept under the rug because they are too strange, too unconventional? I can't help but scrutinize everything I read and hear now, constantly searching for the unexplained, the extraordinary. As for the government, I have always maintained a healthy dose of skepticism. Nevertheless, I can't help but consider all those tales of cover-ups and hidden truths. If something as remarkable as the Mothman can exist, what else is out there that we are unaware of? Are they hiding information from us, or are they as clueless as the rest of us? It's difficult to trust them when I know they withhold so much. Seeing the Mothman has made life significantly more intriguing, that's for sure. I now appreciate the enigmatic nature of our world, the unknown. It has injected a sense of excitement into my daily life, knowing that there's more to our world than what meets the eye. Moreover, it has made me realize how much we take our safety and the predictability of life for granted. After witnessing something like that, I've become more vigilant, more aware of my surroundings. Ultimately, what I've come to understand is that there are things in this world that may forever elude our comprehension and explanation, and that's perfectly all right. It's not about possessing all the answers, my friend. It's about embracing the questions and relishing the journey. Let me share with you an experience that unfolded on a humid summer evening in the vibrant city of New Orleans. It was July 7, 2015, and I found myself away from home on a business trip, seeking respite from the stifling heat and the chaotic energy of the French Quarter. Little did I know that this trip would unveil a creature so extraordinary, it defied all logic and left an indelible mark on my perception of reality. After a long day of meetings and negotiations, I decided to venture out in the evening to Audubon Riverview Park to walk along the banks of the Mississippi River. As I walked along the riverfront, a sudden rustling of nearby foliage caught my attention. I turned my gaze toward the source of the sound, expecting to catch sight of a stray animal or perhaps a river breeze swaying the vegetation. What I encountered, however, was beyond the realm of imagination. Emerging from the brush was a creature that belonged to an entirely different world, a reptilian being that defied the boundaries of known biology. Standing at least 7 feet tall, it possessed a robust muscular body covered in scales of varying shades of green. The scales shimmered under the fading sunlight, reflecting an ethereal iridescence that seemed to breathe life into the creature. Its limbs were powerful and well-defined, reminiscent of an apex predator. Each limb terminated in claws with an almost metallic sheen. The creature's head was elongated, adorned with a crown of bony ridges that traversed its snout, leading to a pair of piercing amber-colored eyes. These eyes stared at me with both an intelligence and wisdom that would captivate anyone who dared to meet their gaze. Its mouth held rows of sharp, serrated teeth, perfectly suited for a carnivorous existence. Subsequently, it was not lost on me that it could be looking at me as a possible dinner. A forked tongue flickered in and out, sensing the air with remarkable precision. The creature's reptilian features were accentuated by a long, slender tail, which seemed to move with a grace that defied its size. Every movement the creature made exuded a sense of primal power and precision. It glided effortlessly, its steps silent, as if it were an ancient guardian navigating its domain. The atmosphere around us seemed to shift, as if acknowledging its presence. The encounter put me in a state of awe and bewilderment. Fear and curiosity intertwined within me, creating a crazy mix of emotions and an instant ability to think logically. The reptilian creature seemed aware of my presence as well as my state of mind, its gaze fixating on me for a fleeting moment that short-circuited my head. It felt as though the creature could perceive my very essence, understanding me like no other living creature ever could. As quickly as it had appeared, the creature vanished into the depths of the surrounding wilderness, leaving me standing there, breathless and trembling. Questions tumbled through my mind. What was this creature? How did it exist? And what was its purpose in showing itself to me? Long after that encounter, I immersed myself in endless research. Yet I found no concrete evidence or historical accounts of such a creature. It seemed to belong to a realm untouched yet by science, like a glimpse at an existence that we may never fully comprehend. The encounter opened my eyes to the vastness of possibilities that lie beyond our comprehension. To this day, I carry the weight of that encounter. The reptilian creature serves as a reminder that our understanding of the world is far from complete. I've seen some things in my time, things that would make a grown man cry, but nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what I encountered that night in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. I'm a former Navy SEAL, served my country for a good part of my life, seen war, seen death, seen the worst of humanity. But this was different. I was on a mission, a private one. A friend of mine, a local, had been complaining about strange happenings around his property. Livestock disappearing, strange noises at night, the works. I figured it was probably a bear or a cougar, but he insisted it was something else. He'd lived in these parts all his life, and he swore up and down that he'd never seen or heard anything like it. The first night I was there, I set up camp near the edge of his property, where most of the disturbances had been reported. It was a clear night, the stars shining bright above the towering pines. I'd always had a connection to this area, having spent many summers here as a kid. The forests, the mountains, they were a part of me. But that night, they felt different, unsettling. I was about to turn in when I heard it. A strange clicking noise, like two stones being tapped together. It was coming from the tree line, just out of sight. I grabbed my flashlight and my sidearm and I moved towards the sound. And then I saw it. It was crouched low to the ground, moving on all fours. It was pale, so pale it almost glowed in the moonlight. Its body was gaunt, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. But its face was something out of a nightmare. Large black eyes that seemed to absorb the light, a gaping mouth that looked like a void, and no nose. Just smooth, pale skin. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd faced down enemy combatants, stared death in the face, but this creature, it terrified me. It moved with a speed and agility that was unnatural, darting between the trees with a grace that belied its horrifying appearance. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off it. It watched me, its black eyes never leaving mine. I could hear the strange clicking noise again, louder now. It was coming from the creature. I retreated back to my camp, my mind racing. What was this thing? Where did it come from? And more importantly, what did it want? I spent the rest of the night awake, my eyes trained on the tree line. The creature didn't show itself again, but I could hear the clicking, a constant reminder of its presence. The next day, I started my investigation in earnest. I needed to know more about this creature, about what was happening in these woods. I had a feeling that this was just the beginning, that there was more to this story than I could see, and I was determined to find out what it was. Over the next few days, I started digging deeper. I talked to the locals, asked them if they had seen or heard anything strange. Most of them brushed me off, said it was just the wildlife or the wind. But a few of them had stories. Stories of strange creatures in the woods, of livestock disappearing, of eerie noises in the night. One old man, a lifelong resident of the area, told me about the pale ones. According to him, they'd been around for as long as he could remember. They were creatures of the forest, he said, not meant to be seen by human eyes. He told me to leave them be, to let the forest have its secrets. But I couldn't do that, not after what I'd seen. I spent my nights watching the tree line, waiting for the creature to show itself again. And every night, like clockwork, I'd hear the clicking. It was like it was taunting me, reminding me of its presence. But it never showed itself, never stepped out of the shadows. I started to question myself. Started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. But then I'd hear the clicking, and I'd remember those black eyes, that gaping mouth. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I knew it was real. One night, about a week after my first encounter, I decided to venture deeper into the forest. I needed to find it, needed to confront it. I packed my gear and set off, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves under my boots. I moved slowly, my senses on high alert. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, could feel the unease settling in my stomach. And then, there it was, the clicking. It was louder now, closer. I turned my flashlight towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. And there, in the beam of light, I saw it. The creature, the pale one. It was watching me, its black eyes reflecting the light. It was on all fours, its body low to the ground. It was still for a moment, and then it moved. It was fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen. It darted between the trees, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, frozen, as the silence of the forest closed in around me. The urge to follow was strong, but something held me back. A primal instinct, a warning from deep within. I knew then that I was not meant to follow, not meant to uncover the secrets of this creature. I turned back, retracing my steps through the forest. The clicking had stopped. The forest was silent once again. But the silence was different now. It was a respectful silence, a mutual understanding between me and the creature. I made it back to my camp just as the sun was rising. I packed up my gear, my mind racing. I had seen it, had seen the pale one. I had ventured into its territory, had heard its eerie clicking. I knew then that I couldn't stay, couldn't continue my investigation. I had seen too much, had gone too far. I left that morning, left the forest and the pale ones behind. But I can still hear the clicking, can still see those black eyes in my dreams. I know they're still out there, in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. All right, here we go. I am not one to get spooked easily. Maybe that's just me being full of myself, but it's the truth. Being in the military kind of grounds you, you know? Shows you what you're made of. Teaches you when to be scared and when not to be. About a month back, I definitely had a good reason to be scared. Unless I was just hallucinating the whole dang day, I can't make heads or tails of what I saw. I've been fishing every season since I hung up my military boots. That's a decade now. Bass, catfish, trout. I've caught them all. And I eat what I catch. I am not a trophy fisherman. You probably wouldn't even know I was a fisherman if you just dropped by my place on a lazy afternoon. I don't keep fishing magazines on the coffee table. My tackle box is stashed away in the garage, out of sight and out of reach. I don't talk about fishing. It's my alone time. Out there, away from the hustle and bustle with a fishing rod in my hands, it's kind of soothing. Usually. About a month ago, that peace and quiet went out the window. I had recently moved my fishing spot from its usual place in the Florida Keys. I set it up about 20 miles towards the mainland, in the Florida swamps. I just wanted a change of scenery. Looking back, that might not have been the best idea because something found me out there. Despite all the camouflage and concealment, something picked up my scent and came right for me. It was hunting me like a gator on a duck. I was sitting in my little boat, all cozy and unprepared. It probably thought I was an easy meal. If I'd been any less lucky that day, I probably would have been eaten. I didn't hear it coming. That's a bit embarrassing, but I didn't. I only saw it when it emerged from the swamp and slithered into the clearing. It was huge. At first I thought it was an alligator, but its scales were too long, too thick and wild. When I aimed my fishing spear in its direction, I saw the beast for what it was. A snake, I think. A snake larger than any creature I've seen in North America. It was looking right at me. It was looking at me and hissing. Hungry, I could tell. I was shocked. I was appropriately afraid. My fishing spear was not the kind of weapon designed to take out creatures of that size. It kept coming toward the boat. I gripped my spear tighter, just in case I'd have to jab to keep the beast moving. The base of my boat was a few feet off the water. When that thing got close and reared up, its head was level with the edge of the boat. I jabbed it, and it didn't flinch. It hissed and thrashed, almost annoyed, and it attacked the boat itself. It could have slithered up there, I bet. It could have joined me in the boat and had me cornered. I don't know why it didn't. Maybe it was just toying with me. Maybe I ticked it off and it wanted to tick me off right back. It tore through the boat in seconds. The next thing I knew, the entire boat was capsizing. I fell into the water and went tumbling with it. I hit the water hard, lost my breath. Most of the boat collapsed right on top of the snake or the gator or whatever the heck it was. To this day, I still don't know what it was. Luckily, the weight of the boat knocked it down, disoriented it. The bottle of fish attractant I had with me busted open. The scent must have hit that animal like a whirlwind. It thrashed at the splintered remains of the boat and gave me just enough time to swim. I made it to the shore with my spear in hand. I knew I couldn't outswim it. It was only a matter of time before it picked up my scent again. I turned around and used a tree to steady my aim. I was still pretty shaken from the fall. I waited. I held my breath and I waited, not moving. I watched the snake thing rake its tail through the water, searching for the source of the enticing odor. When its tail came up empty, it started to look around again. I watched as it reared up again and realized a horrifying truth. Its body sat just as naturally upright as it did on all fours. It didn't struggle to hold its balance at all. It spotted me again. It hissed, and it slithered toward me, this time moving on the surface of the water. Luck found me again at that moment. If the snake hadn't reared up, I would have been aiming at its back and its tail. On its hind end, though, I could get to its underbelly. I could get to somewhere important. When I jabbed this time, it hissed. I screamed with every ounce of air in my lungs. I screamed until I was empty. It must have been enough. I watched the snake turn around and flee in the other direction. I waited again. I knew I had to. I had to make sure that it wasn't circling around me, trying to approach from the flank. It took me hours to make it back to my truck. Every sound and movement put me on edge. I don't scare easy. I didn't used to, anyway. The more time that passes between that encounter and now, the more I want to know what that animal was. I'll tell you one thing, though. I'm not willing to go back to get those answers. I'm built for a lot of things, but fishing that creature is not one of them. At least I can take my fishing rod anywhere else in the world. That monster thing, it can have the Florida swamps. I'm a regular guy just like you. I work as a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains. It's a peaceful job most of the time. But this past winter, things got a bit weird. So I'm out there in the mountains, right? It's the off-season, not many folks around. My buddy, let's call him Joe, and I are out there doing our usual cleanup. We're trying to get everything tidied up before a big snow that was about to hit. Now there's this creek that runs through the area. People love to hang out there, but they leave a mess. So Joe and I are walking along the creek, picking up trash. Suddenly Joe spots something. He's got a keen eye for animal tracks, and he's found some that don't belong. There are these hoof prints, big ones, leading up to the creek and then back into the woods. But here's the kicker. They're bipedal. Like, whatever made these tracks was walking on two legs. Weird, right? So we decide to follow the tracks. They lead us into the forest, and it's clear this thing is heavy. The tracks are deep, and they're headed southeast. We're about 20 minutes into our trek when we catch a whiff of something foul. Smells like rotten eggs. We keep going and the smell gets stronger. The tracks lead us to this old hollowed-out tree. The smell is unbearable now. Joe checks out the tree and pulls out this thing. It's like a skin, but it's covered in scales. It's big, too. Like human-sized. We're both freaked out at this point. We radio the other rangers, tell them what we found, and hightail it out of there. When we get back, the other rangers are full of questions. We show them the skin, and they're just as baffled as we are. The head ranger tells us to steer clear of that area for a while. Fast forward a few weeks. We've all been away because of the snow. When we get back, the first thing we do is check out the area where we found the skin. Nothing. No tracks, no skin, no weird smells. But over the next few months, we keep finding these pieces of scaled skin. They're smaller than the first one, but they have that same rotten egg smell. And then last week, Joe found more of those bipedal hoof prints near a campsite. I don't know what's going on, but it's got me worried. Whatever this thing is, it's been keeping a low profile, but I'm not sure how long that'll last. A couple of weeks after Joe found those tracks, I was out on patrol. It was late. The sun was setting, and I was about to call it a day. I was walking along the creek, just enjoying the quiet, when I heard a rustling in the bushes. I turned around, and there it was. This creature standing on two legs just a few yards away from me. I froze, not sure what to do. It was big, bigger than any man I've ever seen. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in scales, just like the skin we found. They were a dark green color, almost black. The scales were rough and jagged, like they could cut you if you touched them. It had a long, thick tail that swished back and forth slowly. Its legs were muscular and ended in hooves, just like the tracks we found. But its upper body, that's where things got really weird. It had arms, long and muscular, with hands that ended in sharp claws. And its face, it was almost human, but not quite. It had a long snout with sharp teeth that glinted in the fading sunlight. Its eyes were a piercing yellow, and they were fixed on me. I stood there frozen in fear as it watched me. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching me with those yellow eyes. I don't know how long we stood there staring at each other. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared into the forest. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I had just seen. Then I turned and ran back to the ranger station. I told the other rangers what I saw, and they were just as shocked as I was. We decided to keep a closer eye on the area and to warn any visitors to be careful. I don't know what that creature is or where it came from, but I do know one thing. It's out there, in the Appalachian Mountains, and I have a feeling it's not going anywhere anytime soon. My name is Mike, by the way. I'm a city boy, born and raised in New York. But I got this wild idea back in the 80s to visit California, specifically the Redwood National Park. No one else was ever available to join me, so I figured, why not take a solo trip? So off I headed in June of 1988. So I'm there, in the heart of the park, surrounded by these towering trees. I'm walking along this trail, completely lost in the beauty of it all. But before I know it, the sun's starting to set and I'm nowhere near the main trail. I try to backtrack, but everything looks the same in the dimming light. I'm starting to panic a bit, but I try to keep my cool. Then, out of nowhere, I spot this figure up ahead. It's small, like a kid, but there's something off about it. It's got this long, slender neck that seems to stretch on forever. Its skin is pale, almost luminescent in the fading light, and it's covered in these strange, scaly patches. And its eyes, man, they're this deep, unsettling red. They're staring right at me, and I swear it feels like they're looking into my soul. Despite the fear creeping up my spine, I decide to follow it. I'm desperate, and I figure maybe this thing can help me find my way back. I follow it for a bit, and it keeps stopping quickly to look back at me like it wants me to follow it. But then, out of nowhere, the ground just disappears from under me. I'm falling, and it feels like it's happening in slow motion. I land hard, and when I open my eyes, I'm in this dark cave. And I'm not alone. There are these things staring at me. They look like skulls, but they're moving. like they're alive, and they're all around me, watching me. I'm terrified, but I can't move, can't scream, and then everything goes black. When I wake up, I'm back in the forest, not far from the main trail. I have no idea how I got there, but I don't stick around to figure it out. I hightail it out of there, swearing all along that I'll never set foot in a forest again. I mean, I was shaken. Who wouldn't be? I had just had the most terrifying experience of my life, but I was also confused. What was that creature that wanted me to follow it? And those skull-like things, were they real? Or was I just hallucinating? I needed to get out of the forest, away from the trees. I needed to be around people, even if I didn't feel like talking. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning in my hotel room, unable to shake the image of those red eyes and the eerie glow of the cave. The next day, I decided to do some research on the area, so I went to the local library and started looking up local legends and folklore. I figured maybe there was some sort of explanation for what I had seen. I spent hours poring over old books and newspaper articles, but I couldn't find anything that matched my experience. Feeling defeated, I decided to head back to the hotel. But as I was leaving the library, I noticed a small, dusty book on an end cap with other titles about the area. The title was barely legible, but I could make out the words, Redwood Mysteries. I opened the book and started flipping through the pages. Most of it was just old tales of gold miners and lumberjacks. But then I came across a chapter titled, The Guardians of the Forest. It told a story of ancient beings that were said to protect the forest and its inhabitants. They were described as having long necks, scaly skin, and deep red eyes. My heart started pounding as I read the description. It was eerily similar to the creature I had seen. The story went on to say that these beings were rarely seen by humans, but when they were, it was usually a sign of a major change or event. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it just a coincidence? Or had I really encountered one of these guardians of the forest? And if I had, what did it mean? What was this major change the book was talking about? I spent the rest of my trip trying to find answers, but I never got anywhere with it. In the end, I returned to New York with more questions than I had when I left. But one thing was for sure. My trip to California was one I would never forget. I've been a park ranger at the Yosemite National Park for the past decade. It's been a good gig. Lots of the usual stuff: guiding tours, maintaining trails, dealing with lost hikers. You know, the typical ranger stuff. But lately, some things have been happening that are anything but typical. It all started with this one incident. I was on my usual patrol route when I got a call in the early evening about a disturbance near Half Dome. I was already in the area, so I responded. When I got there, I found a woman in her mid-30s looking terrified and pointing at the sky. Now Yosemite is a place of natural beauty. It's peaceful. It's well maintained. But what she was pointing at was something I'd never seen before. She claimed she'd seen a UFO. At first, I thought she was just seeing things. Maybe she was dehydrated or had altitude sickness. But then I saw it too. A strange light in the sky, moving in ways that didn't make sense. But it gets weirder. As I was trying to calm her down and figure out what was going on, the light suddenly shot towards us. It was so fast it was just a blur, and then it was gone. I reported the incident, but it was dismissed as a possible drone or some kind of optical illusion. I didn't think much of it after that. A few weeks went by without any unusual incidents, and I thought maybe it was all over. But then, it happened again and again. Each time, the light seemed to get closer and more intense. I don't mind telling you that it was starting to freak me out. The higher-ups started to worry about the safety of the hikers. Yosemite is a vast place with plenty of wilderness and remote areas. The park started increasing patrols in the area, but nothing seemed to deter the strange light. Then, almost exactly 2 weeks after the last sighting, Another incident. This time, the light didn't just appear and disappear. It stayed, hovering in the sky above the half dome. It was so bright it lit up the entire area. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was definitely not a drone or a plane. The light was so bright it was almost blinding. I had to shield my eyes with my hand just to look at it. It was pulsating like a heartbeat, and it was making a low humming sound that I could feel in my chest. I radioed in the situation, but all I got was static. I tried again, but it was the same. It was like the light was interfering with the signal. I was alone, with a strange light hovering above me. I won't lie, I was scared. I decided to head back to the ranger station, but as I turned to leave, the light moved. It shot across the sky, leaving a trail of light behind it, and then it was gone. Just like that. I stood there, staring at the empty sky, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. But there was no logical explanation. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen or heard of before. The next day, I again reported the incident to my superiors. They were still skeptical, but they couldn't ignore the fact that something strange was happening in the park. They decided to bring in some experts to investigate. For the next few weeks, the park was swarming with scientists. They set up equipment and camped out, hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange light. But it never appeared. It was like it knew we were watching and decided to lay low. Just when we thought it was over, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just a light. It was a full-blown UFO. It was hovering above Half Dome just like before, but this time it was closer. It was so close, I could make out details. It was round and metallic, with lights all around it. It was silent, except for that low hum that I could feel in my bones. As I stood there staring at the UFO, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was like I was meant to be there, like this was my destiny. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how I felt. Then, without warning, the UFO shot up into the sky and disappeared. It was so fast, it was just a blur of light. And then, it was gone, just like that. I stood there staring at the empty sky for what felt like an eternity. I was in awe, but also a little disappointed. I had so many questions, but I knew I would never get the answers. The next day, the park was buzzing with excitement. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, but I couldn't tell them. I couldn't put into words what I'd experienced. It was something you had to see to believe. In the weeks that followed, the sightings stopped. The scientists packed up their equipment and left, and the UFO enthusiasts moved on to the next hotspot. Life in the park went back to normal, but I was changed. I had seen something extraordinary, something otherworldly. I knew that we were not alone in the universe. And so, I continue my work as a park ranger, guiding tours and maintaining trails. But every night I look up at the sky and I wonder if they'll come back, if I'll ever see that strange light again. I hope this message finds you well. I've been sitting on a story for quite some time, one that seems more like a plot of a 70s science fiction movie than a part of my life. But as strange as it sounds, it's true. I worked as a flight systems engineer at NASA from the late 60s into the 80s. Those days, my job was all about crunching numbers for trajectory analysis, fine-tuning life support systems, and making sure our orbiter subsystems were in top-notch shape. But there's a bit of my time at NASA that's not just crunching numbers and ticking boxes. It's about something that, even as I type this, I still find hard to believe happened. During the late 70s, we came across 4 beings, entities, if you will, that weren't from our neck of the cosmic woods. They were extraterrestrial. And no, I'm not kidding. The weirdest part? We didn't just observe them, we interviewed them. As unlikely as it sounds, it's the God's honest truth. Please know I'm not trying to spin some grand tale or draw you into a web of fiction. This isn't some 70s sci-fi novel. It's my life. It happened. It's a piece of history. albeit one that's been kept under wraps for obvious reasons. But I believe it's time to share this story with you, in all its uncanny detail. So let me dive into the thick of it. One evening in late '79, we just finished monitoring a Skylab re-entry simulation when we received an odd blip on our radar, something that wasn't fitting the usual space debris and satellite signatures. The object was moving in an uncharacteristic pattern, completely defying our understanding of orbital mechanics. It wasn't long before we realized that this was no ordinary space anomaly. With each passing moment, it became increasingly clear that we were dealing with an unidentified flying object. This was uncharted territory, even for us seasoned veterans of the space race. After a high-stakes scramble, the object, or rather the craft, was intercepted and secured in one of our remote facilities. It was a vessel of sorts, a sleek and oddly luminous entity that bore no resemblance to any spacefaring vehicle we'd ever seen or engineered. It was both unnerving and awe-inspiring, a conundrum that challenged our comprehension of technology and physics. But the true shock came when we found out the craft was not empty. Inside were 4 entities, distinct and yet similar, clearly intelligent and obviously not of this earth. Their forms were humanoid but with distinct differences, their languages indecipherable, yet with a sense of purpose that transcended the barriers of speech. In a bid to understand these beings and their intentions, we initiated a series of interviews, under utmost secrecy. As outlandish as it sounds, I was one of the key team members involved in this unprecedented endeavor. The conversations, if one can call them that, were a mix of nonverbal cues, gestures, and a slew of improvised methods that we hoped would bridge the communication gap. Each entity seemed different in demeanor. One was inquisitive, constantly inspecting its surroundings, while another seemed indifferent, almost stoic. The third was what I can only describe as nervousness, while the fourth had a certain air of authority, an intangible feeling that it was in some way superior or more knowledgeable. Those interviews, they pushed the boundaries of our understanding and confronted us with a reality we'd only speculated about in theoretical discussions. Extraterrestrial life was no longer a mere concept. It was real, it was tangible, and it was right in front of us. That's about as far as I can go in this email. But know this, there's more to this story, so much more. Perhaps in time, I'll find the words and the courage to share more. For now, I hope this gives you some insight into the extraordinary reality that unfolded during my time at NASA. I signed up to work for a freelance security firm to earn some extra cash before the holidays, and I'd worked dozens of jobs without any issues until this happened. I got a call early in the day from my recruiter telling me they needed emergency help because this hotel's usual guy quit his position, effective immediately. They sent me the address and I went in. The front desk worker showed me what I was supposed to do during the night. I had a station in the lobby across from them. I was supposed to act more like a deterrent for crime than anything, and I had to do a round through the hotel every 2 hours to make sure everything was all right. Seemed easy enough. Not long after I settled in the desk, attendants started making small talk. I'm not much of a talker, so I answered in short responses to try and signal, like, hey, let's just enjoy the quiet. Some time passed, and out of the blue, they said to me this place is haunted, you know. Of course, I had to ask more about that. But when I did, all they said was, I'm sure you'll see it for yourself soon enough. Then laughed as if it were a normal thing to say. I left to do my first round. I brushed off what they'd said. I've always been skeptical, and some crazy old receptionist wouldn't change that so quickly. The hotel was only 3 stories with 10 rooms available for guests to stay in. I walked up the first flight of stairs and cleared the second floor. Then I walked up the second set of stairs and began walking down the hall. I couldn't explain it, but something in me was on edge as soon as I stepped foot in the hall. A chill came over me, and I felt the hair on my neck stand up. It was quiet as I walked to the end of the hall. I made it halfway back down the hallway, then I heard thumping from above me. It was loud and it sounded like it was coming towards me, like heavy footsteps running almost. I stood in place and looked at the ceiling while I heard the noise. The sound finally reached where I was standing, and just as I was expecting it to move further away, it thumped 3 times right on top of me. As soon as the thumping stopped, I heard a slow creaking noise from behind me. I turned around and the door to one of the rooms I'd walked past had opened. I didn't want to go in, I wanted to turn around and leave. But it was my job for the night, and I had to check it out. I walked to the door and knocked on it before I opened it, all the way. I yelled hello to see if anyone responded. I was hoping a guest might have heard the thumping and peeked out to see what it was. No response. I opened the door all the way and turned on the light. There was no one in the room, and it didn't even look like a room they would have guests in. All of the furniture was covered with white sheets, and the pictures and mirrors were off the wall and facing away from view. I couldn't understand how the door opened. I tried to rationalize it, maybe the vibrations from the thumping opened, or I stepped on a loose floorboard, but it didn't make sense. I closed the door and left. I made my way back down to the lobby and the receptionist was still there, looking at me with a small grin. They asked me if everything was all right on the walkthrough. I asked her how many people were staying on the 3rd floor, and they told me that only one couple was staying at the hotel, and they were on the 2nd floor. I was clearly confused by that information, and they asked me what happened. I told them. We chatted about some other strange occurrences that had happened at the hotel until my next round. Apparently, people have reported seeing shadowy figures. They've heard knocks at their doors and no one was there when they answered, and many people have said they've had vivid nightmares. I was apprehensive about my next walkthrough, but I had to do it. The 2nd floor was fine. No disturbances to report, but the 3rd floor was once again noisy. It wasn't thumping this time. I could have sworn I heard crying. I froze when I looked down the hall. The same door was open and I know I closed it. I approached the room slowly with my hand on my taser and turned on the light. The crying stopped when the light came on. I walked in and looked around the room. I didn't see anyone. I called out for whoever was in there to come out, but I got no response. I walked to the window to make sure it was shut and locked, but as my back was turned, I heard the door slam. I immediately dropped what I was doing to rush to the door. I opened it and walked out of the room. At the end of the hall, I saw her. A woman stood in front of the stairs with her face in her hands, like she was crying. My heart fell to my feet and I froze in place. Thumping noises began above me again and rapidly made their way towards the woman. The door to another room creaked open and she walked inside. I ran down the stairs back to the lobby without looking back. I told the receptionist what I saw and they nodded their head. It wasn't a news story to them. I suppose this is why the other security guy quit on such short notice. November 21 in New Jersey is like Christmas. Everyone is excited and chomping at the bit to get out into the woods. It's the start of deer hunting season. Hunters are up before the crack of dawn, getting out into the woods to try and get the first buck of the season. I'm one of those people that starts to act like a crazed psycho when it gets close. I pull out all my gear and make sure it's all set. I probably clean my hunting rifle 3 or 4 times. I don't sleep the night before. I just love hunting and can't wait for it to be time to head into the woods every year. But this past year, I saw something really strange. I don't know what it was really, but I definitely have never seen anything like it. The day I saw it, it was opening day, the first day of deer season. I usually hunt on public land, even though it's kind of crowded. I was down in the Pinelands, at a spot I'd scoped out. I already had my tree stand set up. I was out there before it was light, trying to get a buck as they appeared in the dawn light. I usually alternate between watching the woods with my naked eyes and looking in the scope. You can see more stuff with the naked eye, but you can see clearer and in more detail with the scope. When I'm not looking in the scope, I'm just looking for motion, looking for something to appear out in the trees. You end up spotting a lot of squirrels and some rabbits. I often will see a doe or a little buck wander by. which is always disappointing. Whenever I spot the deer shape emerging in the underbrush, my heart starts to hammer, and I get pumped. But then you see that it's a doe and you have a rush of disappointment. Well, this past year I was out and I wasn't seeing any animal life at all. Not a single squirrel or rabbit. There weren't even really birds in the trees. It was extremely quiet and I was straining my ears to try and listen for anything moving through the woods. Eventually, I did hear something. It was the snapping of a stick pretty far away. I swiveled a little in my deer stand and brought up my rifle scope to look through. I scanned the woods as best I could, alternating between the scope and no scope. I strained my eyes hard to try and see something. I was about to give up when I heard another sound, like another branch snapping. I looked at my scope again, trying to find it in the trees. This time, I did finally spot something, but it wasn't a deer. It was hard to make out because of the trees and the dense autumn foliage. There hadn't been a strong enough cold snap to make the leaves fall yet, so there was still a lot on the branches. Through my scope, I could catch glimpses of the creature. It was very tall. At first, its height made me excited because I thought that maybe it was a buck with a huge set of antlers. It didn't have antlers, but it did have horns. They were like long, curving goat horns. They were probably a little longer than a foot. The top of its head, where its horns were, was the first thing I caught a glimpse of. I didn't really see its face at all, but I could see other parts of its body when it stepped between two trees. It had two big wings instead of arms. The wings weren't feathered, otherwise I might have thought this was a super weird crane or something. The wings were big and black and leathery looking. Between the long goat horns and the wings, I knew for sure that this wasn't a deer, and it definitely wasn't normal. It was near the end of my scope range, probably 450 yards, so I don't think I was afraid of it seeing me. I watched it in my scope for several minutes until I couldn't follow it anymore in the underbrush. When I think back on this whole experience, I feel like it explains why I didn't see a single deer that day. In fact, I didn't see a single other animal. No squirrels, no birds, no rabbits or raccoons, nothing. The woods were dead silent, and it seemed like something evil hung in the air. I left the tree stand around noon. I was texting with a buddy afterwards about what I saw. He didn't really believe me. I ran into an older hunter back at the parking lot where I'd left my car. He was going to get set up for an evening hunt. I told him what I saw, and he immediately started packing his stuff back into his truck. He said there was no point going out into those woods to hunt. He said that the lack of any animals at all was a perfect sign to go somewhere else. He said it must have moved its territory and it was best to steer clear of this land for the rest of the season. He said that it wasn't worth the risk. He seemed to act like our lives were in danger. I don't know what it was, and he wouldn't tell me, but he seemed very spooked by it. I've listened to his advice since then and haven't gone back to that section of public land. Based on what that old hunter said, it wasn't worth risking a closer encounter. I'm not sure that this is my story to tell. It was a story I heard from my father, and it was a story he heard from his father before that. It has affected us all, I guess. That's why I feel some ownership over the tale I'm about to share. It's followed our family for 3 generations. My grandfather was a hunter. He had a reputation. The best furs in Wyoming all had my family name attached to them. That reputation earned my grandfather some pretty historic invites. He met the vice president once. The invite at the center of my story, however, brought him to Yellowstone National Park. Nowadays, when you hear the name Yellowstone, it's attached to an idea of beauty. A scenic lake, hot geysers, and a slumbering volcano. That wasn't the case in the late 1950s. Mismanagement of the park and its fauna led to overpopulation and overgrazing. The vegetation was being stripped bare. Elk were especially problematic. The park district invited a few hunters to come into Yellowstone and deal with the elk. Hunting was permitted in Yellowstone at the time, so the act wasn't particularly surprising. It was the amount of death that shook the park district and jeopardized its relationship with the public. In the end, over 5,000 elk were killed. It was called an extermination. My grandfather was a part of that. His story wasn't about the elk, though. His story was about the thing that came out of Yellowstone, chasing all of that death. My grandfather had positioned himself in a clearing. He climbed a deer tower and enjoyed a 360-degree view of the area. It was only a matter of time before an elk came along. He missed his mark and hit the deer in the backside. The gunshot scared any other wildlife out of the area, and the injury wasn't enough to put the elk down. My grandfather decided to give chase. He followed the trail of blood through Yellowstone. Strangely enough, it seemed the elk had led him back to a larger herd. Branches were trampled, and the foliage was eaten bare. My grandfather slowed down. He was more interested in surveying the massive herd than he was in pursuing the single elk he'd hit. He was careful and quiet in the way that only hunters can be. When all the tracks he was following began to converge, he was certain that the herd of elk was waiting for him just through the next tree line. He pushed forward. When his vision penetrated the wall of chewed greenery, he came upon something else. There were no elk. There were signs that they had slept there. There were more grazing patterns and tracks around the perimeter, but there were no elk. It appeared that the herd had gathered there, walked tirelessly in a circle, and then vanished. He returned the rifle to his back and began to investigate. When the sound of a snapping tree branch came from nearby, he looked. He saw what looked like an elk's rack shifting among the trees. Then came its face. The head of a large bull with deep, dark eyes set in the back of its skull. My grandfather described this part better than me. He said the animal, while its body was still obscured by the forest, looked into him. He said those dark eyes glimpsed his soul. He described the light changing overhead, as time seemed to blur, and he became snared by the gaze of the animal. Eventually, the elk came forward. What stepped out of the tree line was no living animal. Below the neck, the elk's body was gone. Its fur was matted and patchy. When it entered the den, it stood upright. It stood at least 12 feet tall, as my grandfather described it. When it shifted and lurched, he could see its tight skin dragging against its bones underneath. He said he felt it judge him. He heard a voice in his head, something that challenged the very purpose that had brought him there. He said, looking at the beast, that he knew immediately that he needed to stop killing. He couldn't continue as a hunter. My grandfather told my dad that he knew immediately. Hunting would lead him down the same emaciated path that had starved this creature. He said he knew he would become something like the monster he was staring at. Then, according to my grandfather, the beast wandered back into the woods. There were no elk left there for it to consume, he said. It moved on to find meal elsewhere. My grandfather only killed a dozen elk that season. Out of the 5,000 total, 12 isn't very many. The monster he saw forgave him for that dozen. My family hasn't picked up a gun since. My father swore that he'd never touch a firearm, and I had no reason to. The hunting itch was out of our blood by then. We all know of the monster, though. We've all had that creature described to us with such detail that we never once considered going back on my grandfather's words. We all understand that lifting another rifle, taking another life, will invite whatever curse had deformed that thing. Then it will be us wandering in the woods, searching for our own kind. We never heard of any other sightings. None of the other hunters who came out of Yellowstone were changed in the same way as my grandfather. That massacre would lead to widespread change in the park district, though. Maybe there was enough death there to scare the hunters, even without the glimpse of that creature to motivate them. I hear that Yellowstone is beautiful now. Like I said earlier, it's all geysers and lake beds now. I think I'd like to see it. I'd like to see the place where life was able to grow back. But the last thing I want to see is that creature. What if it decides it isn't looking for elk anymore? What if it decides that letting my family go was a mistake? I used to live in a quaint little 2-story house located in the suburbs of Ohio. Its charm came from its age and a few unique quirks. One of those quirks was my room. It was more like a mudroom that was repurposed into a makeshift bedroom. It had our household washer and dryer in there, and a door that led outside, secured with a heavy deadbolt on the inside. But despite the odd setup, I was comfortable enough except for one detail that would change my nights and eventually my entire life. Life was simple, full of innocent childhood pleasures. And so, the first few nights after my mother decided I should sleep in the mudroom were uneventful. But then it began. The door to my room would creak open in the middle of the night. All I would see at first was fog and a bizarre otherworldly light seeping into the room. Then he would walk in. The figure was peculiar, almost comical as I look back on it. Its upper body was that of a strange reptile, while the rest of it was decidedly human, garbed in a long brown detective-style jacket, complete with arms, legs, and shoes. As a child, I called him the Lizard Man. The absurdity of the sight did nothing to alleviate my terror. His gaze was cold, almost dispassionate, and he seemed to observe me intently before walking past my room and disappearing down the hallway. In the clear light of day, I gathered the courage to explore my room and the hallway where the Lizard Man vanished every night. There was nothing out of the ordinary that I could see. The deadbolt on my door was secure, and the hallway held nothing more sinister than family photos and laundry hampers. It felt normal, and yet every night this scenario repeated itself. The Lizard Man continued to visit for months. The routine was eerily similar each night. The door would open. The fog and light would filter in, and the Snake Man would stroll into my room, observe me, then walk away. The few times I mentioned the Lizard Man to my family, they brushed it off as childhood imagination. An imaginary friend, if you will. I got blamed for the door occasionally being left open, even though I would have needed a stool to reach the lock. My family remained blissfully unaware of the eerie occurrences in my room, leaving me to face the creature alone. The visits didn't let up, to the point where I dreaded sleep. Every creak of the house sent my heart racing. The fear I felt was palpable, lingering in the back of my mind throughout the day. It wasn't just the idea of a bizarre entity entering my room. It was the unknown. Why was he visiting me? What did he want from me? Even though the Lizard Man never physically harmed me, the sense of menace that clung to him was enough to make my skin crawl. The room felt colder and heavier on the nights he visited. My breaths came shorter, heart pounded louder each time that door opened. I began to research my strange visitor. I pored over books and surfed the internet, learning about folklore, mythology, and paranormal phenomena. My journey led me to various paranormal blogs and forums where people shared similar experiences. And there I found the term. From the common themes that emerged in others' experiences, I started identifying the patterns that matched my own. My visitor, I learned, was what some referred to as an apparition, a specter that presents itself to the living. Some online sources suggested that apparitions like the Lizard Man may represent unresolved issues, messages from the beyond, or even manifestations of my own subconscious fears. It was a complex realm of theories and interpretations. I couldn't discern whether the Lizard Man was a product of my mind, a spirit from another dimension, or perhaps a symbolic representation of some deep-seated anxiety. One thing was certain. The Lizard Man, in all his terrifying absurdity, was real to me. His existence, his frequent visits, were part of my reality, even if they remained invisible to the world outside my mudroom turned bedroom. I decided I wouldn't let the Lizard Man rule my nights anymore. My solution was simple. I started sleeping on the living room couch. For years, that's where I spent my nights, away from the mysterious door, the eerie fog, the unnerving light, and most importantly, the Lizard Man. My family didn't understand, but they didn't object. The decision gave me a sense of control, something I felt I had lost with the Lizard Man's uninvited visits. I still felt the chill of fear every now and then, especially when I had to go near that room, but it was bearable. As strange as it sounds, I even found myself chuckling at the absurdity of the Lizard Man's appearance. My life went back to normalcy, or at least as normal as it could be with a nocturnal couch routine. The impact of those years, however, lingers. I am more aware, more open to the inexplicable aspects of life. The lizard man, in all his frightful strangeness, taught me that. Looking back, I realized that the lizard man was not just a terrifying nightly visitor. He was a lesson, a turning point in my life. He pushed me to question, to explore, and to confront my fears, however bizarre they may be. Today, I maintain an open mind when it comes to the unexplained, the paranormal. I'm no longer the terrified child who trembled at the sight of a terrifying reptile creature, but I do retain a healthy respect for the unknown, a curiosity about what lies beyond our immediate perception. If I were ever to cross paths with the unexplainable again, I believe I'd be better prepared to face it, not with blind fear, but with curiosity and courage. And as for the lizard man, he is an unforgettable part of my past, a peculiar entity from my childhood nights. He doesn't visit my dreams anymore, but his memory remains, a reminder of the time when a terrifying lizard creature in a detective-style jacket were enough to keep a child awake at night. You know, before I settled into this quiet life, I was an FBI agent, stationed at a facility so remote it felt like the edge of the world. We conducted experiments there, the kind that would make your blood run cold. One experiment in particular has stayed with me. It involved a creature, a beast that looked like a nightmarish blend of man and wolf. It was enormous, muscles bulging under its thick fur, and it had these eyes, these haunting yellow eyes that seemed to glow with an inner fire. I only ever saw it from a distance, but even from afar, its raw power was palpable. It was like standing next to a roaring furnace, you know? You could feel the heat, the danger, just radiating off it. They released it into this fenced-off area, a sort of nature reserve filled with all sorts of wildlife. I don't know why they did it, but this creature was designed to kill, and it did. I won't go into the grisly details, but it was a sight that still haunts my dreams. I've seen some strange things in my time at that facility, things that would make a hardened man shiver. But that creature, it was something else. It was like it was from another world. And the way it moved, the way it hunted, it was like watching a force of nature. After witnessing that creature, my days at the facility were never the same. Every creak, every shadow, every unexpected sound, it all made me think of the beast. I couldn't shake the image of its muscular form, its yellow eyes, the way it moved with such deadly grace. I tried to find out more about it, but it was like hitting a brick wall. No one would talk. No one would even acknowledge that the creature existed. It was like we were all part of some unspoken pact to pretend it was just a figment of our imaginations. But I knew what I saw. I knew that creature was real. And I knew it was still out there, in that fenced-off area, doing what it was designed to do. The thought of it kept me up at night, kept me on edge during the day. I started to notice other strange things at the facility too. Unexplained occurrences, things that didn't add up. Like how some of the wildlife in the fenced-off area would just disappear without a trace. Or how sometimes late at night I'd hear these low, guttural sounds echoing through the halls. I asked questions, tried to get answers, but it was always the same response. Silence, evasion, denial. It was like everyone was too afraid to talk, too afraid to admit what was really going on. I've got a tale for you that's going to make your hair stand on end. I've been following your channel for a while now, and it's been a real comfort knowing I am not the only one who's seen things that don't make a lick of sense. So I was up in the Appalachian Mountains. Just a regular guy taking a break from the hustle and bustle of city life. I am not a believer in ghosts or goblins, but what I saw up there, well, it shook me to my core. I was sleeping in this little cabin I'd rented, nestled right in the heart of the mountains. It was quiet, peaceful, and I felt safe. That was until I heard this weird noise outside my window. Sounded like scratching, like something was trying to get in. I got up to check it out, and that's when I saw it. This thing, this creature, was right outside my window. It was pale, with long arms and fingers that ended in claws. Its eyes were like two black holes, and it had this twisted grin on its face. It was like something out of a nightmare, a mix of man and beast, and it was staring right at me. I was shocked, just staring back at this thing. And then all of a sudden it lunged through the window, landing right in the middle of my cabin. I fell back, and it gave me this weird look before jumping back out the window. I was too scared to move, too shocked to call for help. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere with this creature. It was gone, but the mess it left behind was proof enough that it had been there. My window was shattered, glass everywhere. And then I heard another window break. It was back, and it was inside my cabin. I could hear it moving around, and I knew it was coming for me. I managed to slam my bedroom door shut just as it reached for me. I could hear it clawing at the door, its breathing heavy and ragged. In a panic, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I could barely get the words out, but the dispatcher could hear the fear in my voice and sent help. The clawing eventually stopped, and I heard the creature leave. When the cops showed up, they found me huddled in a corner, shaking like a leaf. They searched the cabin, but there was no sign of the creature. They took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They suggested it might have been a burglar, but I knew the truth. After doing some research, I found out that the creature I saw was called the Rake. It's a paranormal entity that's been around for centuries, preying on people and leaving them traumatized. I found out that I wasn't the only one who'd seen it, and that gave me some comfort. Since that night, I've done everything I can to protect myself. I've put extra locks on my doors and windows, and I always keep a weapon close by. I still have nightmares about that night, and I know I'll never fully recover from the trauma. But I'm not going to let the Rake control my life. I'm going to keep fighting, keep moving forward, and keep sharing my story. In the weeks that followed, I found comfort in the stories of others who'd survived encounters with the Rake. We formed a sort of community, sharing our experiences and supporting each other through the fear and uncertainty. Looking back, I feel lucky to be alive. The Rake is a creature that most folks never come across, and from what I've read, those who do don't often live to tell the tale. But in a weird way, I'm grateful for the experience. It's made me more aware of the dangers that could be lurking out there, and it's given me a new appreciation for life. Hello there, my name is Hank. I'm a rancher living in Texas, specifically near a small town called Martha. I'm in my 50s now and moved here in my early 30s. Like many people residing here, I was drawn to Texas for its vast open spaces as well as the rugged beauty of the landscape. I also appreciate the opportunity to be self-reliant. I own a small herd of cattle that I tend to regularly, and then I get busy with other tasks around the ranch. Depending on the time of year, I might be fixing fences, tending to the cattle, or hunting for game. I grew up hunting in the woods, but ever since moving to Marfa, I've developed a fondness for tracking game across the open plains. I live with my wife, Susan, and our 2 children, both of whom are in college. Every November, hunting season begins, and I spend a few weeks bringing in game whenever I can to stock our freezer for the winter. Susan and I are particularly fond of venison. Deer are plentiful in these parts, and the daily limits are generous. So sometimes Susan or my eldest daughter Emily will join me on a hunting trip. A few years back in 2022, I just finished up a big project on the ranch and was eager to get out into the wilderness. After settling back into a routine at home for about a week, I decided to take Susan out for a hunting trip. This was also a sort of date day for us since I'd been busy for almost a month. We set out very early, just as dawn was breaking, and headed north towards the more open plains, but not too far from the ranch since deer are often found grazing near the edges of the woods. As we were setting up, I was letting the truck idle, maybe 100 or so yards from the edge of the woods. We were just off the edge of a well-known landmark, an old abandoned barn that stood alone in a field. I'd just finished pulling everything together when Susan said something and pointed towards the woods. When I looked up, I could see a dark shape moving along the edge of the trees. This isn't an uncommon sight in Texas at all. At first, I assumed it was a deer, since they like to graze near the woods, but it also could have been a coyote or even a fellow hunter, although I doubted that. I got a little excited but could tell that something was off with Susan. She was sitting stiffly and staring at the woods. When I asked what was wrong, she said that something just didn't look right. It was about 6 a.m. now and we were ready to hunt, but she seemed really bothered. I offered to drive the truck closer and see what it was. She was resistant at first, but hesitantly agreed. She gripped the edge of the truck seat tightly as we drove towards the barn and the edge of the woods. Meanwhile, as soon as I started moving the truck, the creature at the edge of the woods turned our way and seemed to be observing us. I expected it to run off as we got closer, but it didn't. That put me on edge as I was now thinking it was a coyote that was too used to humans. These animals can be dangerous and eventually end up trying to break into barns or getting too close to people in aggressive ways. We got to about 50 yards from the edge of the woods and I pulled a pair of binoculars out of my coat. It took a second to get situated, but I got the creature in my sights and realized it wasn't a coyote at all. By now it was trying to move deeper into the woods. As I watched, holding my breath, it moved on 2 feet, not like a coyote, but like a stiff human. Susan then hit my arm and told me she wanted to go back. "Hold on," I said, wanting to get a better look. I didn't dare drive the truck in closer since the ground was very uneven, but I kept my eyes glued to the bipedal creature. It wove in and out of the trees, poking out every few seconds to look back at us. The trees obscured it a bit, but I was able to see longer, shaggy hair on its body, matted in some places. It was a dark, almost black-brown, and had long arms that reached down past where I would say the knees were. I asked Susan if she wanted to look, but she shook her head and asked again if we could please head back. In fact, she demanded it. We switched spots so I could keep looking at the creature while she directed us back out to the hunting spot. As the truck moved away from the woods, the thing came out onto the edge of the forest a little further, but not like it had been before. It was a bumpy ride, but I could see that it was observing us and would occasionally bend down, again with stiff knees. When we were far out from the woods, Susan and I started hunting and didn't talk about it until I brought it up an hour later. I asked if she wanted to know what it was. She said no at first, but then gave in to curiosity. Plus, we couldn't see the creature at the edge of the woods anymore. I explained that it almost looked like a man in a black and brown ghillie suit, but one who was walking strangely. She looked at me and said she'd noticed that too, that the movements weren't fluid like a human, but they were very straightforward and more animal-like. We tried to focus on hunting, but after an hour only caught sight of a few smaller deer and a rabbit. So she and I decided to head back in. Since that day, we haven't seen anything like the creature again, but I've brought it up over beers in the bar and have heard similar stories. Locals in the area seem pretty comfortable with the idea of Bigfoot or something ape-like around. I'm thinking that's what we must have seen. Whatever it was, I didn't get a feeling of menace or aggression about it, more that it wanted to be left alone and stay unseen. Eventually, Susan admitted that she knew about the stories too, and had heard them growing up, but never believed that such things existed until we saw it for ourselves. I remember this one time, about 5 years back, when me and my wife decided to leave the hustle and bustle of Chicago and settle down in the quaint countryside of Montana. We found ourselves a cozy rental cabin, nestled deep in a serene neighborhood. The place was right at the end of a cul-de-sac, a perfect getaway from our previous home where cars zoomed by every minute. We thought it'd be a nice change, a chance to be close to nature. A massive ranch with untouched land stretched out behind our cabin. We imagined it would be pleasant to have critters as our neighbors. The neighborhood was small, just a handful of cabins around. We got acquainted with our neighbors soon after our arrival. They were friendly folk. But one thing that intrigued us was the large ranch at the end. It always seemed deserted. No one in the neighborhood seemed to know much about it. Like I said, our cabin was a rental. All the cabins around were fairly new, so there wasn't a long history of residents. Our neighbors mentioned that they hadn't seen any activity at the ranch. They'd occasionally hear strange noises late at night, which they brushed off as coyotes or mountain lions that were known to inhabit the region. About a couple of months after we moved in, we adopted this adorable Labrador puppy from the local animal shelter. We named him Bruno. Bruno was full of energy but lacked training. But we figured, since we had a spacious backyard, we had plenty of room for him to run around and play. One evening, I returned from work earlier than usual. My wife was visiting her folks and I went out to check on Bruno. To my surprise, I found that he had dug a hole under the fence and was nowhere in sight. One of my neighbors, a kind lady with 2 kids, told me that she saw Bruno running towards the ranch. She would have chased him down, but her kids needed her attention. So I decided to venture towards the ranch to find Bruno. The ranch was hidden behind a thick line of pines. I had never really taken a good look at it before. As I approached the back fence of the ranch, I noticed an old weathered sign that read, "Trespassers will be prosecuted." I hesitated, wondering if I should risk trespassing. The ranch looked abandoned. The fence was worn out and the undergrowth was thick. I peeked through a window and saw dusty old furniture, but no sign of any inhabitants. I was in 2 minds about whether to go ahead and trespass, when I heard a chilling scream. I ducked and tried to see through the fence. All of a sudden, everything went quiet. And then, I saw this rat dart out from the undergrowth and sprint across the field. The scream seemed to have come from it. What I saw next still gives me the chills. A huge creature, something like a wolf, but not quite, was chasing after the rabbit. It had an enormous mane of fur around its neck and was snarling ferociously. The creature caught up with the rabbit in no time and clamped its jaws around its neck. Blood splattered everywhere. I turned around and sprinted back to my cabin, locking myself in. My heart was pounding in my chest. I had never seen anything like that before. The most terrifying part was that this creature, this beast, was running on its hind legs. Its body was eerily humanoid, except for its monstrous size and the thick fur. My mind was filled with thoughts of Bruno. I couldn't stop worrying about him. I decided to alert my neighbors. The few I could reach were convinced that it must have been a mountain lion, the largest known predator in the area. I tried to convince them otherwise, but what could I say? I didn't know what I had seen. Feeling a sense of responsibility, I decided to alert everyone. I knocked on the last cabin's door and was greeted by this old sunburnt guy, rugged and a bit intimidating. He said he's seen that wolf. At first I thought he was talking about Bruno, but he was referring to the monstrosity that had chased the rabbit. As I stood there, dumbfounded, trying to explain what I had seen, he invited me into his cabin and pulled out a sketchbook. He flipped to a page with a sketch, and I swear, it looked incredibly similar to the beast I had seen. This guy, he had recently moved in with his son. He used to live across the valley and had encountered this creature when he was out hunting. He referred to it as the Dog Man. He narrated his encounter. He initially mistook it for a regular wolf, but when it stood upright, he realized he was dealing with something far more sinister. I was dumbstruck by his story. I suggested that we should call the cops. He just chuckled. I stepped outside his cabin, feeling overwhelmed. And that's when I saw Bruno. Bruno came sprinting towards me, whimpering and shaking uncontrollably. I picked him up and held him close. He was shaking like a leaf. I took him home, wrapped him in a blanket, and held him tight. At that moment, everything seemed surreal. But after hearing similar stories on your channel, I've come to accept that what I saw was real. I pray to never encounter such a creature again. We moved out as soon as our lease was up. Grand Canyon National Park, August of 2022. My name is Andrew, and I have an extraordinary tale to share about an encounter I had in the Grand Canyon National Park. I was on a rafting trip with my friends, a tradition we've had for years. This year, the Grand Canyon was our chosen destination, and it was a bright afternoon when the incident occurred. We had left on our journey from a launch point at the top of the river. I remember the air was crisp, and the sound of the rushing water was a constant companion. We navigated the river's twists and turns, each bend revealing more of the park's breathtaking beauty. As we were maneuvering through a particularly challenging rapid, my eyes were scanning the surroundings. I've always been fascinated by wildlife, always on the lookout for something unusual, and I was about to come across something truly remarkable. We reached a calm stretch of the river, and I steered us towards a sandy bank for a break. As I was securing the raft, I glanced up towards the canyon walls, and suddenly I froze. Perched on a ledge, about 100 feet above us was a creature that resembled a bird, but was the size of a human. It was colossal, and as I squinted, I could make out the face of an eagle and glossy black feathers and broad, powerful wings. But its eyes were sharp and intelligent, and it stood on two legs, much like a human. Instinctively, I moved towards it, leaving the others behind. For some reason, I was being drawn closer. However, once I got close enough to see it clearly, fear gripped me. But as I scrutinized the creature, I realized that it didn't seem hostile or dangerous. In fact, it looked just as startled to see us as we were to see it. As I stood there, gazing at the creature in astonishment and disbelief, I couldn't help but marvel at its immense size. It must have been at least 6 feet tall, its silhouette stark against the canyon wall. Its body was covered in sleek, dark feathers, which contrasted sharply with the red and orange hues of the canyon. Its muscular wings were folded at its sides, spanning an impressive length. My heart pounded with fear. The legends I had heard about thunderbirds flashed through my mind. But as I observed the creature more closely, I noticed that it had a regal expression in its large, golden eyes. It seemed curious rather than threatening. The creature spread its wings, a slow, deliberate movement that was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. I held my breath, unsure of how it would react. To my surprise, it didn't take flight. Instead, it remained perched on the ledge, tilting its head slightly as if trying to understand our presence. I decided to take a step back, hoping to show that we meant no harm. To my relief, the creature mirrored my movement, retracting its wings slightly. It was as if it understood my intentions and didn't want to provoke us. We continued this silent exchange, each of us observing the other. It was a surreal experience, like being part of a silent dialogue between two beings from different worlds. I felt a sense of connection, a bond formed through our mutual curiosity. Time seemed to stand still as we remained locked in our gaze. The river around us was tranquil, as if holding its breath, creating an atmosphere of enchantment and mystery. It felt like I had stumbled into a different world, a place where mythical creatures were real. Despite the fear still simmering within me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder. I was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment that most people could only dream of. But as much as I wanted to stay and delve deeper into the encounter, a part of me knew it was time to retreat. With a final glance at the creature, I slowly turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. I made my way back to where my friends were still lounging by the raft, my mind racing with a mix of emotions. I couldn't wait to share my encounter with them, to describe in vivid detail what I had just experienced. They could see the truth in my eyes. I recounted every detail, From the creature's appearance to our silent communication, they listened intently, hanging on to every word. Some were amazed, while others remained skeptical. Then, as a group, we all continued down the river. But despite all of us looking around, we found no further signs of the creature. The rest of the day passed by in a blur, a mix of thrilling rapids and laughter with my friends. We concluded our rafting trip as planned, reaching our campsite just as the sun began to set. Emotionally, each friend had a different response to my unexpected encounter. Some felt a sense of wonder and gratitude, while others felt a lingering unease, a reminder of the unknown lurking within the depths of the canyon. But we all agreed that it was a day we would never forget.